me call to order this meeting, Mayor Commission Budget Development Work Session. Today is Thursday, June 11th, 2026, and the time is 9 a.m. And Ms. Johnson, do you want to give preliminary remarks before we start going into the actual agenda? You want me to go straight to item 1 with Ms. Rothenberg?
I do want to give preliminary remarks. Good morning, everyone. For the record, Faye Johnson, City Administrator, and I am going to welcome everyone to the June 11 Budget Development Work Session, and also for those who are watching on television. I want to just put the first item into context for the board to keep in mind as you hear the presentation from our City Attorney and Chief Financial Officer. As we look at the general fund and the potential impact of the tax ballot measure if it were to pass. So our current general fund budget rounded is $284 million. 58% of that budget is for public safety. And before the ballot measure took shape, we were proceeding on the basis of public safety not being impacted in terms of reduction because of it being the board's #1 priority. The other part of the budget relates to quality of life and our internal governance. So in terms of dollars, about $165 million of the budget is for public safety. The remaining $58 million is what would be impacted by the property tax measure if it were to pass. So I would like the board to just keep that in mind, understanding that if it were to pass, given the numbers that the property appraiser is projecting for the city of West Palm Beach, there is no way that we would be able to escape not having to look at how we would reshape our organization. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Rothenberg and Ms. Safront.
Thank you, Administrator Johnson. Kimberly Rothenberg on behalf of the City Attorney's Office. Welcome and good morning, Mayor and Commissioners and staff. We are here today to talk about the property tax reform joint resolution that's currently being molded into a ballot question for the voters on November 3rd this year. Before I do that, I want to let you know that I put next to your seat a publication put out by the Florida League of Cities that talks specifically about frequently asked questions about communicating about property taxes under Florida's law, banning local government expenditure on ballot questions. So you should find it very instructive on what you can and cannot do as elected officials relating to your talking points. And if you have any questions after you review it, please feel free to give me a call and we can talk about it further. Also included there is the full House joint resolution with the ballot question and another bill that was adopted should the voters elect to modify the homestead exemption. And with that, Bridget and I, as Ms. Johnson indicated, will be presenting to you first and foremost an overview of the tax exemption ballot measures, and then also what the potential ballot measure, should they be adopted, budget impacts. So first, the joint resolution, which is the structure for the ballot measure, really addressed three things. The first thing that it does is it reduces our non-homestead valuation, which we currently are allowed to do up to 10%, and reduces that to 5%. Next, it increases the potential homestead exemption for homesteaded properties of permanent residents. The way that that is defined is a permanent resident is one who has residency as of December 31st, 2026, and those after have different exemption amounts, but then we'll go over those. So as of January 1, 2027, the proposed homestead exemption would be $150,000. As of January 1, 2028, that amount would raise to $250,000. Thereafter, it would be adjusted and indexed to inflation. As it relates to those other new homesteaded properties, they would have a 5-year period wherein they would be entitled to a $50,000 exemption. Thereafter, they would get a full exemption. The other thing that the bill does is it limits the local government's ability to spend those ad valorem revenues that it receives. And the limits are for public safety, education in public schools, financing or refinancing of infrastructure, financing of natural resource projects, issuance of new local bonds and payment of debt service, meeting obligations for retirement pension benefits, and funding operations and administration of a municipality. The next thing that the legislature did during the special session was adopt House Bill 3F. That bill adjusts what we call our rollback rate. It's regulated through statute, and it changes the voting requirements that if you want to exceed the rollback rate, if it's not more than 110% rather than a simple majority, it will require a 2/3 vote or a supermajority of the body. And if you want to exceed the 110% of the rollback rate, it would have to be by unanimous approval. This resolution also changes, for the purpose of this ballot measure, the current 75-word limit for ballot summaries to allow them to have more words for their ballot summary. And with that, I will turn it over to Bridget Souffrant to help you understand what the impacts for the upcoming budgets are as it relates to these measures should they be adopted. And keep in mind that that election would be November 3rd, and it would require a 60% vote of the populace.
Thank you, Kimberly. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. Bridget Souffrant, Chief Financial Officer. So for our non-homesteaded properties, they represent approximately 75% of the city's total value, which is just over $20 billion. Reducing that annual allowed escalation from 10% down to 5% would result in approximately an $8.7 million reduction in tax revenue. For context purposes, our preliminary June values for this year increased 9.33%. So under the current legislation that we have today, we can capture that 9.33% for our non-homesteaded properties. But under the proposed legislation, we would only be able to capture 5% of that 9.3 growth that we had over this last year. So, and you'll see in our budget presentation later today how impactful losing $8.7 million would be for our needs of covering our standard contractual obligations that currently exist. If you increase our homestead exemption to $150,000, that equates to an estimated reduction of $13 million in taxes. Moving that homestead up to $250,000 in fiscal year 2029 would equate to another $9.3 million in reduced property taxes. Another piece for you to consider is that homestead exemption increasing by inflation annually after fiscal year 2029. So for talking purposes, if we say inflation or CPI is 3%, that would mean an additional $7,500 of exempt value on however many homes that means at that point in time. So we don't have data right now where I can tell you this many homes that are homesteaded have a value of $257,000. I just don't have that data. So I can't give you a tax number for that, but it would be increasing value reduction of $7,500. So in summary, should the proposed legislation pass in fiscal year 2028, the city would experience an estimated combined impact or reduction of $21.7 million. And in fiscal year 29, an estimated minimum impact of 9.3 million. So that 9.3 is just on the homestead because I'm not comfortable estimating what our values would be that far out. So that's a minimum impact. Any questions for myself or city attorney?
Thank you for that presentation. If you could turn back to slide 4 and 5, because a lot of the attention has been to the amount of reduction, but I don't want to lose sight of what the legislature is doing. They're telling us not only they're reducing the money, they're telling us what we could spend the money on. We, a local government, they're limiting the uses of the funds. I mean, that is, it's an abdication of home rule to the highest degree. And if you look at the list, unless there's something, I don't see water treatment in there. I see maintenance and stormwater control. I don't see water treatment. I don't see parks. Go to the next page. Maybe I'm missing it. 5.
Oh, sorry.
I don't
Too
see
fast.
parks. I don't see libraries. So, again, I want the public to understand, not only are they limiting the amount of money we get, they're also telling us what we can spend the money on. All right, any questions, commissioners, Commissioner Ward?
Thank you. And I understand, and that's actually was something that I'm curious about, is how we're going to interpret education based upon, our libraries do provide educational services and things like that. But I did understand from the measure that we can, as a body, adopt specific things that we feel we can use taxes on. And so what are we preparing for that in that regard? Because I know that that's a piece of the legislation that we can act. So if we did want to save our parks, which is pretty important, we could include that as a legislative body and vote on that.
Well, I can simply tell you that, on slide number 5, one of the identified expenditures are expenditures approved by such municipal governing body, except those expenditures prohibited by general law. And it's really going to be a matter of interpretation and the breadth of what the interpretation is as to how much power and authority the local government has to spend on things outside of the enumerated list. But we will definitely, assuming that we need to go down that path, start working with the League of Cities and others to make sure that we understand as best we can what our powers and authorities are so that we do it appropriately.
And I was being presented with this in another body yesterday, and they were talking about that the ballot language actually includes reference to a potential just complete referendum of property taxes, whereas the text of the legislation does not, and that's a conflict. So I'm hoping that we can join in on that conversation when it comes to making sure that the ballot language is actually correct, that it's not just saying and making a voter think that eventually they're not going to have any property taxes, because that's what I understand is actually being presented. So I would love for the city also to be involved in that conversation to make sure that we're saying, hey, that's misleading.
What organization was that? Just
Healthcare District, Palm Beach County.
Thank you.
Questions? Commissioner Fox?
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask our city attorney, I haven't had time to read the documents you left us about communication, but I'm just curious, are we planning a communications campaign of some kind? I think obviously even in what we've heard today, I think there's a lot of miscommunication with the public about what this is, and I'm sure that there will be state communications as well, but I feel like every city needs to inform our residents as best as we can. So I'm curious if we have something planned.
It's really up to administration. I'm sure that we had an initial conversation about what is and what isn't appropriate for education, because we are allowed to educate the public about the facts using our resources. We certainly will work with administration to make sure whatever materials and information that we want to share as a city is compliant with the law. I know that the League of Cities has a very nice toolbox of proposed flyers and different bits of information that municipalities can use, and I'm sure that administration will undertake an exercise to look at what type of education we want to do.
Yes, I just want to add to that. So the Florida City County Management Association has been sending out information, and one of the things that they are stressing to municipalities is to take on an education campaign, but emphasizing the fact that we can educate, but we can't advocate one way or the other. So we've had preliminary discussions with the mayor, and we are looking at what type of educational campaign we will put together. And then, Mayor, I'll defer to you.
That's true. I will point out that we do have some key appropriation items in this year's budget, and the governor has a deadline of signing the budget by July 1st. So out of an abundance of caution, I would say we will probably be relatively quiet on this until we see whether our line item appropriations are approved. And that's all I'll say to that. But yes, we will be looking at a more robust education campaign. And correct me if I'm wrong, Madam City Attorney, we as elected officials can talk about this issue, right? Whether it's on public forums or that type of thing. It's a matter of what we use city resources for in terms of publications. Is that the distinction?
Right. And if you look at number 3 on the list, the question was, can city staff or elected officials express opinions that advocate for or against potential property tax proposals before they become ballot questions? And the answer is yes. And then it goes on to explain, and it says, but should avoid using any city resources for advocacy during the working hours, and probably the, like, an advocacy for or against at the public meeting could, violate. But if we want to look at it, a deep dive on what types of communication, certainly make sure you give us a call, and we will look at it legally for your specific issue if you have any questions.
President Peduzzi and then Commissioner Ward.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify. So the city may always educate as long as we're just disseminating facts, but we as elected officials, we can actually probably go a step further and advocate.
That is what the direction from the league is, and I have a legal memorandum that goes deeper into that, and I'm certainly willing to look at it with you. But yes, I mean, there are First Amendment rights, right, to express opinions.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ward.
So I think, given we're at a public meeting and on the clock right now, I guess I just want to stress that from an education perspective, are we already looking at how trash is going to go up, how, parks programs are going to go up in cost? I mean, I think that is an education standpoint that our residents should know about, is that, hey, this may be an alleviation on your budget, but all of these other services that our residents like. I mean, I think about parks just in general. Not everybody can afford a private club to go play tennis, go enjoy the outside. Our parks are vital for our health and our community. I would go so far and say that they are a health benefit, and we should lean on that. But are we talking about that as, okay, so we're going to be losing, $20 million approximately. We have to then now up these program costs and make sure that everybody who's entering our parks now has to pay to enter, or our trash is going to go up and it's going to go up by this amount, or sanitation, et cetera. So are we doing that so that can be an educational factor for our residents?
We have not yet started going down that path, in that, it's only recent that we know now what the ballot measure is. So we have had our eye on this since the legislature started discussing it. Now that we know what it is and the impact potentially if it were to pass, we would start doing that. As part of what we're looking at, we will not go the extra step to say this fee is going to increase by this amount, because that's a policy discussion and then direction that we would have to have with the board. So we will frame it, from the perspective that, this would be the impact, and if there is no revenue to backfill some of the loss, then potentially the board will be considering fees and whatnot. So certainly we will have that information laid out as part of what we put together.
President Peduzzi.
So just going back, so 75% of our properties are non-homesteaded to approximately 25% are homesteaded. I would think that, is that not right?
75% of our value
Value.
is to so the parcel count is actually 45 and 55% split, but it's the 75% of our value is non-homesteaded.
Okay. And the tax revenue would be based upon the value? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the important part.
Correct.
So 45% of our properties are homesteaded
Yes.
and 55 not homesteaded?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have any idea whether, if this passes, will there be an increase in application for homestead? Will people rethink maybe that property in Florida that I have, maybe now that there's no taxes on it, if I make it a homestead, will they potentially move here or say, I'm not going to do the tenant thing and I'm going to turn it, I'll sell it and it'll become a homesteaded property?
I mean, I would anticipate that we would have some of that, but that's also why I believe it's 5 years that they have to pay property taxes in order the full freight
They
of
would
their
have to
taxes.
create that homestead before the December 31st, 2026 to take advantage of the exemption, assuming that it's increased.
So that'll probably limit the possibility of that happening to a large degree.
Correct,
Okay, thank you.
correct.
Commissioner Warren?
Aside from the homesteaded versus non-homesteaded, when we look at what I've heard is that there can be increases to the non-homestead properties and people that have properties where people are renting. So we can expect that there will be some catastrophic, well, this is education, that there will be a ripple effect that rolls out community-wide, regardless of whether or not someone's property is homesteaded or not. That
I would have said yes to that question, but no longer, because the governor pivoted from the 10% down to the 5%. So your non-homesteaded are also receiving relief in West Palm Beach's case, because we have historically over the last how many years been well above a 5% growth rate. So now we are in fact hindered by that 5%, and it's them, the governor also giving tax relief to the businesses and the non-homesteaded properties by putting that in place. And Mr. Mayor, could I put a clarifying fact out just related to water utilities, because it's a public meeting? I wanted to make sure that it was cited. Our water utility could be deemed as infrastructure, but for purposes of this conversation, they are fully funded by the rates and not by property taxes.
All right.
So our water quality and our water structure is safe.
Prize fund. Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions, comments on this item? All right, thank you, Madam City Attorney. Commissioners, stay tuned. We'll have further discussions about the city's response, communications, et cetera.
Mayor, are we ready to proceed?
Yes, item 2.
All right. Good morning again. Excuse me, Mayor, Commissioners, staff, members of the public. Again, for the record, Faye Johnson, City Administrator for the City of West Palm Beach. This item is regarding the Police Department's building remediation and reconstruction project. So what is going to be covered as part of the presentation, I'm going to start with an overview and then walk through the project milestones. That part of the presentation will be done by Deputy City Administrator Jose Rodriguez, I will then walk through the different funding and occupancy scenarios that are part of what the board will consider. So the two different scenarios one has to do with the completion of the remediation and reconstruction. The other one has to do with constructing a new police building. And under that scenario, there are two options that we're going to walk through. One would be building a new police station on the current site. And then the second one, an option would be building a new police station on the Salvation Army site. We will then wrap up the presentation and turn it over to the commission for its discussion and consensus direction on how you wish to proceed. So with that, I want to kind of just put into context, all of the information that you're going to hear and kind of take a look back at why we find ourselves where we are. Our reality is that, historically, as a city or an organization, we have not followed preventive maintenance best practice. That has been our history, and we have to own that. We have not followed preventative maintenance best practices. So as this project started back some years ago, it was reported that there were roof and water damage, roof leaks that was causing water damage in the PD building. So we started out thinking that this was just a small repair initiative, and as the work got underway and we began to understand from anecdotal comments from PD officers that were on board indicating in the past repairs that had been reported had not been, damage that had been reported had not been repaired, water leaks that had been reported where it had not been properly addressed. The project grew from this small-scale project to a full-scale major remediation and reconstruction project of the entire building. So in the midst of those two revelations, we had to do a paradigm shift of how we were going to tackle this. We had to look at it from a different lens than what we initially started out as. So we took a strategic, situational approach, kind of like the adage that you hear with building a plane while flying. In this particular instance, we launched this major remediation reconstruction project while doing the work in real time. We didn't have the luxury to sit back and pause and then plan it out for 2 years and then put the work into motion. So we had an extensive, and still have an extensive team of subject matter experts that we brought to bear to deal with this project. On the existing building side, it started from the very top of the organization with the mayor and myself, complemented with our Public Works Facility Manager, Jonathan Araganaza, also the Police Department Facility Superintendent, Curtis Canton, our Deputy City Administrator, Jose Luis Rodriguez, who was the boots on the ground in administration, and certainly our police chief, Chief Araujo, has been engaged and involved in every aspect of this project as it has proceeded. We also had, as part of our team, our risk manager, Tim Scott, looking at the air quality matters that were coming forward. But in terms of the outside subject matter experts that were brought to bear on this project, and they were all selected through a competitive process. When the project started as this small scale, we had Glades Roofing Company, and then we bought on Belfour. Apologize, I didn't catch that typo when I read through this over and over. Belfour Restoration Services, which is a global restoration company with 80 years or so of experience. Belfour bought on the mold inspector, who has 40 years of experience in this space of looking at mold and guiding how it is to be remediated. So as we looked at the other option of building a new police building, we expanded our team to include our Chief Financial Officer, Bridget Souffrant, who worked with our financial advisor, Public Financial Management, to run debt service scenarios to help form the budget, the board's decision on what direction you want to formulate this morning. And then we also expanded the team to include our CRA Executive Director, Chris Rue, who worked with JLL, Jones Lang LaSalle, to give us an opinion of value as we look at the scenario of selling the existing building, what we think we would get in today's dollar, if that is the board's direction. And then we also have Netta Architects as part of the outside subject matter experts. So when you look at a project starting at one scale and expanding to another, then of course, that's millions of dollars of unplanned expenses. It comes with a pretty significant price tag, and that would be the case, or will be the case, if we were to go with building a new police building. We're not going to be able to address the direction that the board gives without expending millions of dollars that we did not plan for. So at the end of the presentation, we're going to look for the board, after you have your discussion, as a consensus to give us direction on whether you want to proceed with completing the remediation or you want us to pivot and plan for building a new police headquartered building. So just by way of a brief recap, we know that the building was built in 1995, which makes it 30-plus years old. It is the only police facility that we have. We do not currently have police substations. It is located just due west of us on a full city block between Banyan and Clematis, in Rosemary and Division Avenue. The building has 3 stories with a basement of approximately 300 plus square feet. It is outfitted with electric roll up and down hurricane shuttles. The south side foundation of the building can accommodate 2 additional floors. The building would house all 459 FTEs if the department were fully staffed. Right now, we have 398 of that 459 that is on board. And it includes all of the operations within the police department, starting with the command staff down to the gymnasium and all of the functions in between. So as I indicated, we started out in one place and today we're at another. So just by way of the funding and how it has expanded, we started out in October 2024 with the board approving $700,000 for what we thought was that roof repair. All of the funding for this project has been approved by F resolution of the board. We then procured the subject matter experts from the outside to do the work, which was Glades Roofing, Belfour, and the independent mold testing. We did that in November of 2024. Moving right along, the scope of the work, as they got into it, it grew. So we came back to the board for approval of an additional $6 million. As part of what was discovered once the project got underway, we then recognized that the mold was going to be a significant issue, and we could not allow the staff to stay in the area where mold was being identified, so we started temporarily relocating the impacted staff from that work area so that it could be completely remediated. As we speak this morning, we have temporary relocations of PD staff. The primary relocation site is 415 Clematis that we refer to as our former photographic center. Some officers are over at the Charlotte Complex. We have some in a couple of offices here within City Hall. We have officers located at our PAL building on Tamarind Avenue, and then we have the dispatch temporarily relocated at Fire Station 5, which is our EOC site. And throughout this project, if we were to proceed to completion, we will have some level of temporary relocations. The way that we are handling it is that as areas get completely remediated, we're beginning to have staff to move back into those areas. So proceeding on in terms of how the project expanded to where we are, once we got to that point where we were recognizing the scope of the mold and having to temporarily pull staff out, the mayor simply just made the executive decision that we need to test the entire building, to not leave any area untested, that we wanted to err on the side of caution to make certain that we have taken a look at the entire building as it relates to mold, because the primary concern is certainly the health and welfare of our employees. So when we tested the entire building, then of course that expanded the scope, because we found mold in other areas throughout the building. So that resulted in the additional $13.4 million that the board approved, again by F resolution, in January 2026. That was the last time we came before the board for additional money, and we had a robust discussion about the project and where it was and what direction the board would have preferred for us to be in. So all total, as we sit and speak this morning, we have invested $20.1 million into the remediation reconstruction project. By category, the lion's share of that $20.1 million has gone into the building restoration and remediation, pulling out the walls, to scrub out the mold and rebuild them. We've had $1.3 million that was dedicated to the flooring and electrical and plumbing, then $720,000 on the HVAC system. We've had to invest about $270,000 into office furniture and equipment. I am going to ask the Deputy City Administrator, who is the boots on the ground overseeing it for administration, to walk the board through how that $20.1 million has been allocated throughout the building.
Thank you, Administrator Johnson. Jose Luis Rodriguez, Deputy City Administrator. So I'm going to walk the commission and the mayor through the work that we've completed to date, work that we have ongoing now that the current funding is allowing us to continue working on, and then the areas that we don't have funding for, and that's why we're asking for additional funding to complete them. So in terms of completed work, we've repaired the roof leak issues. Some areas of the roof were actually re-roofed. In addition to that, we then sealed the entire roof to prevent moisture intrusion. And we have a 10-year warranty on that sealing. And in throughout the entire building, we have 12 HVAC air conditioning units that have all been refurbished and repaired. And what that means is that we have had damaged parts replaced or repaired. We've done preventative maintenance to ensure that they are in good working condition and don't have issues moving forward. We've repainted the units, and then we've had all air ducts in the building clean and sanitized. And I want to stop here for a moment to draw attention to the fact that as I go along in my presentation, you're going to be seeing the reconstruction and remediation work. But woven into all of this work that is being done in the building is the preventative maintenance plan that we have implemented that was not in place before. So things like the sealing of the roof to prevent moisture intrusion, the sealing of the building planters. If you drive around the building today, you'll see that there's like a trench around the gardens where the walls of the building are, and that is because the landscape company is there sealing those walls so that when it rains or when those planters are watered, there's no moisture intrusion from those walls into the building. We've also scheduled the air control units. When you look at these units up here, they're not like the units in our house where they just blow air out through a tunnel. They actually have a machine up there that regulates when they open to blow air and when they open to heat so that there's a temperature control. And that's another thing. There's 75 of those units throughout the entire building. They're called variable air valves, VAVs. We're replacing all of those. What that does is that it ensures that you don't have one room that's really hot and one room that's really cold, and that temperature differential can sometimes cause humidity or other issues, so it ensures that we have good climate control. So all of that work that we're doing woven into the basic remediation and reconstruction work is to prevent further mold issues in the future and further moisture intrusion. Now, can I guarantee you that you will have zero mold and zero moisture intrusion in a building? No, because we live in Florida. There's heat and humidity in Florida. That's a way of life. But by taking these preventative measures, you ensure that the opportunity for there to be moisture intrusion from the walls or from the roof or from a problem with the AC, doesn't occur. And that ensures that our building is operating in the best way possible to avoid these issues in the future. So when we look at the basement of completed work, we have redone the entire men's and women's locker room and the entire gym and exercise area, and yet as you can see, that is extensive. You're tearing down walls, you're putting new wall tile, you're doing new electrical, new plumbing, you're sanitizing the area. When we tear down an area, you then sanitize it. You then do air quality control and surface testing to make sure that there's nothing there that shouldn't be there, and then you can start rebuilding it. A lot of new flooring and repainting in the basement. And that gym we're waiting for them to finish the floor, which is a special gym floor. That's supposed to be finished shortly, and they'll be moving back in. In the first floor, the public restrooms were totally reconstructed. You can see there the extent of the work. The supervisory office areas in that area and the lobby were all reconstructed. The lobby, the entire flooring in the lobby was redone. And you're going to see this epoxy flooring throughout the presentation. What we did is that we replaced damaged flooring and carpeting with this epoxy flooring, which is similar to what you see in garages and in gyms. That ensures that there is no moisture or odors collecting in the floor, and if something spills or something happens, you just wipe it off, and you don't have to worry about the floor, being an odor or a moisture or a mold problem. In the third floor, we've reconstructed the command staff offices, the command staff restrooms. Carpet and flooring was replaced as well in the training rooms and various other areas of that floor. And then we get to the work that is currently underway that is funded already with the allocations that you have all allocated. That accounts for, when we take the work that has been completed and the work that is underway, that's roughly about 55% of the building. So currently, the building exterior is being repaired. The planters should be done by July 1st. The exterior building and window sealing and painting, we are putting the final touches on the work orders with the selected contractors, and we're hoping that by the end of this month, you'll start seeing scaffolding and work being done. And that's going to be an extensive work that is just as complex as the inside of the building. You are going window by window, stripping out the current sealant, putting new sealant. Then an engineer comes in and inspects the work of the building and ceiling company to make sure that they did it the right way. And if they don't do it the right way, I've seen the engineers say you have to rip that off and do it again. So we have a quality control in place to make sure that that's done. And then as part of that, you're also going to be repainting the building. And that'll be another one of the big battles against moisture intrusion that we will hopefully win by doing all of this needed work. And then in the entire building, as I mentioned before, we have those air valves that control the temperature in the building. There's 75 of them. We are starting those shortly. And we are also installing the UV sanitation lights in all 12 of the air conditioning units. And those lights have those UV lights that you see often in commercial, but sometimes in residential AC units, where if there's any mold or virus or any bacteria or anything, those inside the air handling unit, it kills it and it prevents anything there from accumulating that could become an allergen or another problem in the future. In the basement, we are going to redo the gun range. Currently, we are in the engineering design phase, and we expect that we will begin that work in December. And you can see that that is extensive work. You're redoing the walls, you're redoing the floor, you're doing late abatement, and that is because whenever you fire a gun, you have lead in the projectiles. So over time, you want to make sure that you periodically are doing lead abatement in addition to any mold issues to make sure that there's no lead in surfaces and stuff like that. And a new air filtration system, because the air filtration system that is there was old, and that's why the gun range was closed down. That's one of the reasons. So you'll get a new air filtration system. And the reason why this is taking a little bit longer than the other building construction is because this is specialized work. This will not be the general remediation and reconstruction company that will be doing it. We will very likely have a specialized contractor that specializes in these public safety spaces for gun ranges, because there's a set of specs that they need to meet. So that's why we're in that design phase right now. In the first floor, we're finishing the community room. It's almost done. There's just a couple of more walls that need to go up, but that was an entire redo, including new lighting, new flooring. The restrooms public restrooms that are attached are right outside the door of that community room, right off the first floor entrance, were also totally redone. In the second floor, we have various work units. For security reasons, we don't get into details of which units are where, but various specialized work areas are also going to be torn down and reconstructed, and new flooring and new interior, new roof ceiling tiles as needed. In the third floor, the training room is almost done as well. And the dispatch area is currently in the process of being rebuilt. So our goal is that by the end of July, the dispatch area and the training room will be done, and the training room will be able to be used again, and the dispatchers will be able to move over from Fire Station 5 Emergency Operations Center back into the dispatch area. So as part of this work, because you have to repaint the building, because there's going to be extensive work done not only on the windows but the walls. Wherever you see problems where moisture intrusion can come in, or cracks or anything, you're going to repair those. We took the opportunity to also refresh the outside of the building, because you're going to have to paint it anyway. So these are the renderings from NADA Architects of what the building looks like now and what it's going to look like when we're all done, which is going to be a pretty dramatic difference. So you can see there the banyan-facing side of what it is now. And this is what it's going to look like. So we're going to go to a blue, which I'm sure police is happy about, a navy blue color scheme. We have the Rosemary facing side now and what it will look like in the future. And this is the intersection right there on Rosemary and Banyan. You'll notice here that there's a clock on each side of that wall. That clock is damaged and needs to be repaired. but rather than spending money to replace that clock only for it to break down again, we're going to propose to update the clock with a lighted police shield that will light up at night and that'll clearly identify this as a public safety building. So that's what it will look like, and again, that should start work. We should start seeing that work by July 1st once we finish with the contractor. So approximately 55% of the areas have been or will be completed by the end of July, and that leaves another 45% that is going to need the funding that we are asking for in order to complete. What has driven these costs up, as previously mentioned by Administrator Johnson, has been that the scope of the damage, as we tested we moved from a local roof repair to an area repair and remediation project to now a building-wide remediation. Areas had greater damage than apparent. You will walk into a room and you'll think that you're only going to have to replace the east-facing wall, but when you start tearing things down and you see more problems, now it's a four-wall problem, not a one-wall problem. The other areas that have also driven up the cost is that just like preventative maintenance was not properly done on the building structure and the HVAC, that includes preventative maintenance was not done on the plumbing system. So there are key areas in the plumbing system. The general lines that go into the faucets and stuff are okay, but a lot of the drains that run behind the walls, they were damaged. So we had to cut out those areas of plumbing, which is, I believe it's cast iron or some type of steel, and replace the entire length of the plumbing to ensure that you don't remediate, put back the walls, and then now we have a different issue, which is not the roof leaking or the window leaking. Now we have a burst pipe. So we're addressing all of these issues simultaneously. So those have been the cost drivers, and that's why we are estimating that it's going to be about $18 million to finish those areas. And we are, for purposes of developing this estimate, we assume that the same level of damage that we have seen in the first half of the building, that we're projecting you're going to see that level of damage in the second half of the building. So it's going to be the same work we've done in the rest of the building. We're going to tear down walls, we're going to remove mold, we're going to sanitize the area, we're going to reconstruct and repaint the interiors, and then as needed, some areas will get new ceiling tiles, new plumbing, new electrical, and new flooring, depending on whether it's needed or not, because we're also mindful that every taxpayer dollar is important and we have to be good stewards of it, so we're not just just giving a blank check to the contractors or to anyone else. We are being very judicious in how we spend the money and what we approve to be done to what is needed and what is preventative that'll save taxpayer funds at the end of the day. In the basement, we still have to finish work in the records room, the IT room, and then various areas. And there's some sauna by the exercise area for police for the gym, as part of the gym that will be redone. In the first floor, those are the key areas that are going to be finished or done if we receive the funding: patrol, briefing room, records, payroll, various offices. Reconstruction of one set. There's more than one restroom in that floor, but one men's and one women's restroom, in addition to the public restroom in the front of the building, in the front entrance, is going to be reconstructed as well. In the second floor, there's a couple of other areas, as you can see there, that are going to be rebuilt. I had something in the third floor. Yeah, in the third floor, the training offices. There's a lounge, and then there's another specialized work areas, and there's 2 men's restrooms and 2 women's restrooms that will also be reconstructed on that floor. So again, in summary, we've got about 45% of the areas that need remediation that currently need funding, and with that, I will turn it back over to our city administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. I'm going to proceed with the presentation. So given that with the funding that has been approved to date, we would be at 55% of the remediation completed. The remaining 45% that needs to be completed and is pending funding, which is really the subject of the focus of the presentation. for the board's consideration. So that brings us to a decision point here with whether we're going to, at the board's direction, complete the remediation project, or again, we're going to pivot and move in a different direction to start planning for the construction of a new building between these two sites, or an alternative site, should the board bring one forward. So just looking at the funding here. So the $18 million that is needed to complete the remediation project, we have from the FY25 audit that was just completed recently, we have $30 million of undesignated fund balance. We would recommend taking the $18 million from that and bring an F resolution before the board at the July 6th City Commission meeting. That $18 million, if it were to be approved, would then bring the total project cost to $38.1 million, or $38 million rounded for talking purposes. That would put us on an estimated timeline for completing the entire project and getting the full staff relocated back into the existing building of the summer of 2027. And I do want to highlight the email that we provided to the board in the packet that was sent to you earlier in the week, the opinion from the general manager of Bell 4, which I would like to read part of it into the record. The email was dated May 1st of 2026, and it indicates in part that upon the successful completion of our, meaning Bell 4's work and interior restoration, the city will effectively be taking possession of a fully renewed facility, restored to a condition comparable to that of a new building. The email goes on to say the long-term performance and condition of the interior of the building can be sustained indefinitely, provided that proper and routine maintenance best practices are followed, meaning we cannot commit the sins of the past. So moving on to the second scenario here with constructing a new police building on site. We had our financial advisor through Ms. Souffrant to run debt service numbers for us. The opinion of cost from NETA was $120 million. If we were ready to pull the trigger today, we would need $120 million in the bank to build a new building, and this is just replicating the PD building on site. Given the timeline that we work under, it takes us about 2 years from the point that the board made the decision that we would be ready to put the RFQ on the street. So the scenario presented to the board today is based on the board making that decision today. 2 years from now, we would be ready to go on the street. So we took the $120 million in today's dollar, did a future value calculation. 2 years from now, that $120 million would be a $136 million cost. We would be looking at a bond issuance to fund that $136 million. The debt service on that $136 million would be 8.9, and all of this is approximate because it would be a factor of what the interest rate is, so forth and so on, and we wouldn't know that until we get into issuing our PFM, looking at what banks would actually give us quotes, on doing a bond issuance. So keep that in mind. These are estimates based on the best information we have today to help the board make a policy decision. But for talking purposes, on a $136 million bond issuance over a 30-year period, we would incur interest of $128 million, bringing the total project cost to $264 million. In doing that, we certainly would not capitalize on the $20.1 million already invested in the building, so we would lose that. Given the relocations of the staff, PD staff right now in the various locations, it's intended to be temporary for 1 year from this point. So looking at what we would have to do to build out the photographics center and then find locations for the other staff, we're looking at a 5-year staff relocation cost of approximately $11 million. In terms of the new building coming online and when we would project to put the entire staff in that new building, we're estimating summer of 2032. That's if we were to build on site. Looking at the other option under building a new PD building, we took a look at what it would look like if we were to consider, or if the board were to consider, the Salvation Army site. We utilized the $9.5 million because that is what had been negotiated. That's not to say that that is final. We know that that has not come forward to the board, but for talking purposes and the board's consideration, if the $9.5 million that had been negotiated but not supported by the board were able to be renegotiated, that $9.5 million would have to come out of general fund dollars. We cannot utilize CRA dollars to buy out the Salvation Army lease if we're going to then put a public facility on that site. So you got the $9.5 million, which will come from the general fund. Looking at the same funding scenario of the $136 million, that wouldn't change. However, what the board would be in a position to consider, given that we would be looking at siting a new police headquarters building on the Salvation Army, the board will have an opportunity to sell the existing site building or the land. And based on the opinion of value from JLL, if that were to be done today, they've indicated that we could get between $36 million and on the high end, $46 million. So we took best case scenario, $46 million in sale proceeds. The board certainly would have the discretion to take that $46 million to apply it toward the financing costs of building on the Salvation Army site, and then that changes the financing scenario in terms of the debt service and how much we would actually be bringing online. What is missing in the calculation of the option for the Salvation Army site is that we would also have to look at financing a garage. Because if we're building on site at the PD building, the garage is in tight. But if we look at shifting and siting it on the Salvation Army site, then we have to plan that a garage would need to be needed for the PD vehicles. So that is not dialed into the $136 million. So that would be an additional cost. We would still have the 5-year staff relocations of about $11 million. Again, we would not capitalize on the $20 million that has already been invested, and we're estimating that we would still be able to bring the building online in summer of 2032. So if we look at the 5-year staff relocations in terms of just trying to detail out what that $11 million consists of, we know a long-term staff relocation is going to have an impact on the operational efficiency of the building, and our chief can speak to that. We would be looking at utilizing $1.5 million to build out 415, or like I still call it, the old photographic center, as well as the Charlotte complex and the temporary workstations that are being occupied at City Hall. Building out the photographic center for 5 years. Just want to bring to the board's attention that further delays our initial plan to bring in businesses within to the photographic center and start leasing that out. So that pushes that out further. The remaining 9.5 million, that estimate, we will be looking at having to find commercial space to then house some of the other operations. And the calculation of the 9.5 million is based on our research of what the square footage would be. That certainly could change and hopefully would be less, but that just gives the board a frame of reference of what a 5-year staff relocation would look like in dollars if it is your pleasure to go in that direction. So again, we did an estimated construction timeline, which I provided a hard copy of it to the board in its packet, and it detailed all of the various steps in the 3 categories. I'm not going to walk through all of those today, but what you see on the slide, it just shows you how we got from October of 2026 to the FY32 timeline, estimated timeline. So if we look at a comparative analysis, of the decision point before the board for your consensus direction, under the first one, to complete the building and end up with a fully renewed building, 18 million one-time funding. We have the funds on hand now, no annual funding impact. We would not have debt service, bringing the total project cost to the 38.1 million. 1-year staff relocation cost of 175,000. It preserves the 20.1 million that has been invested in the building. Estimated timeline of getting the full PD staff back into the building, July 27. Compare it to the first option with building a new building on site, replicating what we have. We would take out a 30-year bond of 136 million. We have to borrow that. We would then bring into the general fund for 30 years a $8.9 million debt service, bringing the total project cost given interest to 264 million, incur 11 million for the 5-year staff relocation, and we forego the 20.1 million invested. Estimated occupancy timeline of June 2032. That option compared to the option of building a new building on the Salvation Army site. We start with the one-time funding of the 9.5 million, or whatever that number turns out to be, from the general fund, again incurring the debt bond of 136 million. The funds would have to be borrowed, the 8.9 million. That's a constant, bringing the total project cost to 264 million. Reduce, if it's the board decision, from the sale proceeds of the existing building, then increase by having to build a parking garage. That number remains to be determined. We would still incur the estimated 11 million for a 5-year staff relocation. We forego again the 20.1 million that has already been invested. The goal would be to meet that estimated occupancy timeline of June 2032. So when you look at the comparative analysis to help shape the board's direction, that's how it would lay out as we speak. So again, the board is at a decision point of how you want us to proceed with either completing the remediation project to house the PD staff back into the building, or you want us to pivot. and start planning for construction of a new building, and then what would be the board's preference in terms of where that new building would be sited on either the existing site or the Salvation Army site. So at this point, Mayor, I would like to turn it over to the board for commission discussion and direction on which path they would like to see us take. And then if we're looking at trying to build in substations, that needs to be factored into the equation. Right now, our current inventory has only one lot. That is 2 acres or more. The rest of them, for the most part, are under 1 acre. So if we're going to go in a direction that we want to have a substation in each commission district, then we would need to look at the cost of first identifying property that would be suitable to build, and then the cost of purchasing property in today's market. And with that, that concludes my presentation, Mayor. I'm happy to take questions. I have staff here, including our Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Souffrant, and we're happy to take questions from the board.
All right, thank you for that very detailed presentation. We'll now open it up for questions or comments from the board. President Peduzzi.
Thank you for that comprehensive presentation. What concerns me, and in light of the uncertainty with the projected tax revenue or potential reductions, is that I don't know how we do anything other than take the more conservative approach at this point. That conversation may be different after a referendum, depending on what happens with the property taxes. But there's such a significant cost differential between 38.1 and 264 million, even if you include the potential of being able to recoup the 40 some million that the property could potentially be worth. You're still over 200 million differential, significantly over 200 million. And I think that at this point we'd have to take a conservative approach. That would be my way of looking at it, and that could change down the road. But we've already invested so much, and the timeline also is significant. We have a place that can be completed fairly quickly, where we can get them back in. We've had assurances from the contractor that it'll essentially be a new facility. The only concern I have is I would have liked to have seen maybe the roof completely redone and replaced, because the roof is what's really protecting that building. But if we have assurances from the company that sealed it that it's good for 10 years, I think as long as we monitor that, I think we should be good and probably should be taking the more conservative approach at this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Other questions, comments? Commissioner Fox?
Thank you. I'll start, I guess, at the beginning. I want to understand what the, original scope and what kind of techniques were used by the contractor we hired to identify the mold, because no, I'm not a mold expert, but now in the past few months that I've been talking to people in the remediation business about how we've been doing infrared technology to look at the walls, to look through the roof, because I understood in the last time we had this discussion in January that was going to make the building like new. And I did not agree to the money at the time because I thought that was just the beginning. I still do not, I have a lot of comments later down the road about some of these other costs that you have, that I have questions about. But I want to understand, are we doing anything to have a third party do an assessment of what we're being told by this contractor? Because how come I'm a contractor for a living, and I can't just in the middle of a project change my fee and tell them, sorry, the scope is completely different. They expect me to do due diligence at the beginning and tell them what is needed to complete a project. So I'm trying to understand how we even got here with these experts in the first place. Why didn't they identify what was needed and give us one full budget that we could have at the beginning, over a year ago, I guess. You know, if we had discussed maybe this is going to be 40 million, maybe it's going to be 80 million, we don't know. But at that time, had they given us the full understanding of what was needed, this might be a very different conversation we're having today.
I will, let me put that into context. If I didn't artfully explain it in the beginning, and then I'll have Mr. Rodriguez to then talk about how it's being dealt with at the ground level. When the concern was brought to administration back 2 years ago, it was that we had roof leaks and water damage. So we were operating on the basis that that was the issue. We had a small scale project, was our mindset, of water coming through the roof. And we had some water intrusion. As Belfour and the roofer got in and started doing that work, we then recognized, again, through anecdotal comments from employees that said, well, we've had roof leaks over on this side of the building, or water intrusion on this side of the building that came in through the windows, and it was just painted over. So as they discovered mold, then that area, the project then expanded, because now we were testing for mold and discovering it. And then when the mayor made the call, given that mold was being identified and walls had to be torn down so that it can be scrubbed and then reconstructed, the mayor said, we're not going to just do this spot checking for mold. We're going to test the entire building. So the project unfolded. For Belfour to have given us, at the very beginning, a proposal of 38 million, we would have had to treat this project like we normally do. We go out on an RFP with a scope of what we want the contractors to bid on, and then they give us the entire projected cost, and we budget for it. That normally takes a year, 2 year period to do that. We didn't have the luxury, after we discovered mold in the building, to say, we're gonna stop, we're gonna write up the scope, and then we're going to put it out on the street. We're gonna do nothing while we do that, and then we're going to, Belfour, you can bid on it. If you get it, fine, you can continue. If you don't, we go with whomever is selected, and then we do the project. That's the ideal way, but using the analogy of building a plane while it's flying, that's what I tried to connote to the board, is that in the midst of this project, in the midst of discovering that we had more than just roof leaks, you know, the project started unfolding because of the recognition that for how many number of decades, nothing was done when damage was reported. So we weren't in a position to detail out this project up front to come to the board to say, we need $38 million based on the bid for this project. It unfolded in the manner as I articulated. And Mr. Rodriguez, I'll let you address the questions on the ground.
Yes, Jose Luis Rodriguez, Deputy City Administrator. A couple of answers to your questions. The first clarification is Belfour is not changing any pricing. Belfour was selected as part of an RFP. As part of that RFP, my understanding is, as part of that RFP, the price that they charge for their services has already been negotiated. But when you're dealing with remediation type contracts, or contracts, for example, for AC maintenance, it's, I'm going to charge you, $5 per square foot of sheetrock that I have to take down, fix, and put back up. So it's not that they're changing the prices as they go along, it's that if you get an initial estimate that says, under our contract, I'm gonna charge you X amount to replace that wall, which is 500 square feet. And then when you start tearing open that area, that 500 square foot of wall becomes 1,000 square foot of wall because it goes around the entire building. It's not that the price is changing or increasing, it's that the amount of work that needs to be done is increasing. So that's what causes the difference between where you started and where you are. The second question, Commissioner, I think you asked is how do we determine what we're testing, where the mold is? Various ways. Air samples were taken throughout the building. Wherever there were air samples that were abnormal, those areas were highlighted for possible remediation. Holes were opened in the walls and samples, physical material samples behind the wall, swabs are done of whatever is behind the walls to see if there's any mold or any other pathogen there that we need to fix. And that and how those walls were identified was really based on three factors. Where staff had said that they had seen water leaks or had odors or other issues that they identified, we erred on the side of caution and we tested it. Where air samples in a room were abnormal, we erred on the side of caution and did surface testing. Where we you know, the administrative staff or the building contractor saw that there was damage, that was tested. So that's how what was tested was done. And my understanding is that they use a vast variety of things. They use air samples, they use surface samples. If you think there's a leak problem, then you use that. I don't know if it's infrared. You mentioned infrared. It might be infrared or it might be thermal, but I know that there's technology that has been used in this building to look at whether there's any water, like an active water leak behind a wall that you may not be able to see until it starts, you know, leaking. And then the third issue was, is there an independent third person that can look at this? There is. The mold inspector that conducts the air samples and the surface samples and makes recommendations as to what areas need to be looked at does not work for Belfour, is not part of the Belfour company. It is an independent third-party mold inspector that's been doing mold inspections and air quality testing and other pathogen and building testing throughout South Florida for over 40 years for various private and government entities, including police departments and hospitals and other areas. And he is the one that when he conducts the sample, he will come back and say, this is what the sample shows, and he's part of the team that makes the decision of what remediation needs to be taken. So it's not the contractor that's going to make money by fixing the wall that says you need to replace that wall, and we say, okay, replace the wall. We have the third-party mold inspector test that wall, test the area, confirm that the results show that something is needed to be done, and then we do it. So I hope that answers some of your questions. I believe I answered them.
But let me also footnote, I'm sorry, I didn't want you to lose your train of thought. I don't want it to get lost in translation here of the critical thing that happened to expand this project to an entire remediation reconstruction. The mayor made the executive decision, which I wholeheartedly agree with, that we should not rely on employees to have to call back their memory from 10, 20, how many years ago to say, we had a leak here and there may be mold behind the wall because it wasn't repaired. It was incumbent upon us to then test the entire building to determine if there were mold behind the building. And lo and behold, it turned out to be so. So I don't want that lost in this conversation.
Questions? Commissioner Ward?
I cut Commissioner Fox off, and I apologize for that.
I'll go with the next round, thanks.
Well, I'm sure she has several questions she mentioned, so I want to make sure other commissioners get to weigh in. We'll get back to her. Commissioner Ward.
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation. And I don't think that that is lost on us. I think that that's our responsibility to review these things. And I think to your point in the presentation that we weren't, doing the things that we needed to do to be reviewing the building and updating it historically. I think we're all in agreement on that. I want to go back to the email from Belfour because I think, for one, I do love that they sent this, and I do think that it's important that we have accountability from our contractors. The caveat is obviously HVAC system, performance, the roof integrity, and the waterproofing of the exterior. When I was, going and did my tour with you all, obviously the interior is being updated. That's what they're working on. I want to kind of go into the roof integrity and the waterproofing. Are we getting warranties on that? Are we getting assurances like we're asking a Belfour from our contractors in that regard, saying, because that's what led to it, right? I love that we have the UV lights going into the HVAC system. I think that we have a good plan with our systems and our facilities managers in coordination now, which I think is incredibly important. But when it comes to the waterproofing, what are we doing to ensure that we've got proper warranties on that and proper assurances that that's covered to the best of its ability and like a new building, comparable to that of a new building, similar to the interior?
Commissioner, my understanding is that the building, the ceiling work and the roofing in the building has a warranty. I know the roof has a 10-year warranty, as we've mentioned before. And the other, it goes along with a point that I made during my presentation, which is the building ceiling that is taking place that is non-roof, it's the windows and the walls. We have an independent engineer that comes in and then reviews the work of the painting and sealing company to make sure that they look for everything. They look at, did you address the structural issue that needed to be fixed, that needed to be sealed? Did you use the right sealant? You can't use just, what we use at Home Depot for our home. Did you use the right sealant? Do you have the right, they look at the thickness of how much sealant was used. They look at everything. And then that independent engineer will then sign off on it that it meets the specifications of the project. And when you caulk, usually the caulking and the sealing lasts, for multiple years. I don't know, it's 5 or 10, but I know that it lasts for many years. And if they haven't done it the right way, or they used the wrong sealant, or they did it in a way that they don't think it's really going to prevent water intrusion or moisture intrusion, they order them to rip all that work out and redo the work. So we do have some controls in place for that.
Do you have a follow-up to that question?
Yes, please. Thank you. And are we working with our facilities managers on a 2, 3, 5, 10-year plan on making sure that the budget for the following fiscal years are going to include some of that necessary repair that just comes with Florida lifestyle?
We have two things that we've addressed along those lines. The first thing is that the general maintenance budget in the public works budget that is used to address the light bulb that breaks, or the window that has to be replaced, routine maintenance repair, that budget has been increased from what it was. I believe it's now, we used to have, and I may be wrong on my numbers, but roughly we used to have, I think it was like 500 or 600,000 a year for those types of odds and ends repairs, and now we have about $1 million.
We doubled it.
So we doubled that. The other thing that we implemented is that the facilities manager that has been here, I think newly hired for about 3 years now, I believe, instituted kind of a checklist so that city facilities, we do inspections of all city facilities for HVAC issues, for plumbing issues, for electrical issues, so that we have that preventative maintenance. And then we also have the money that we set aside 2 budget years ago in fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 25, we set some money aside for facilities and infrastructure repairs, and that money was previously not available, but through one-time funding we assigned that money, and that money has been used for reconstruction of the fuel island at the Charlotte complex. There were restrooms and roofs in the Charlotte complex that needed to be re-roofed. That was done. There was HVAC repair work for the library's HVAC that was currently refurbished and refinished, and I believe City Hall is next, or they have already done it. So we are, doing those things to ensure that these issues, for lack of preventative maintenance, should not occur in the future. I can't predict, I don't know if I'll be a staff member here in 10 years. Hopefully I will, but so I can't predict what future staff will do. But the plan is that there's a plan written in place that they follow a checklist of what they should be doing.
Thank you.
And let me just add to that, on the restoration fund or building repair fund, out of the one-time funding, we actually funded that at about 15 million, given that, we had not done that for many years. So that money is being put to good use. And now that we have the one-time capital funding program in place, that also will help us. But we have changed processes and procedures and best practices, completely from how we operated in the past. I think the challenge is going to be to continue it and not let it slide back to how we operated in the past. My way of saying that is, we can't commit the sins of the past.
Let me go to Commissioner Warren.
Thank you, and thank you for updating those policies. All of them seem to be the appropriate way forward. Do those policies also include like catastrophic event? Because I think that a lot of these issues with the moisture occurred like after major storms, not in addition to age, like Hurricane Matthew. After that, did we go through, or do we plan to go through and have a checklist and do things to address situations as they occur, as well as the standard maintenance?
So now if we get into a situation where we have a hurricane or some other type of natural disaster, whether it falls into or meet the threshold for FEMA, declaring that we would be eligible for assistance, because that is being rethought at the federal level, we have two levels of reserves. We have the 3% that is required under code, and that would be utilized in the event of emergency repairs. And then we have the second tier, which is 10% of the operating budget, that if the first 3%, which is I think probably about 7 million, were to be exhausted, that second tier of the 10%, is around 25 million. So in terms of just repairs, and it is at the direction of the board, if we have now the one-time funding program, which we didn't have prior to 3 years ago. So that probably would be the first tranche of money that we would go to, and then we would tap that 3% depending on the scale of the damage if we were to get hit, and then hit that other tier of the 10%. Now the hope is that we would be able to backfill whatever we utilize by getting reimbursement from FEMA, but we can't have ourselves set up where we're dependent on them. So we have that protection in the budget if we were to get hit.
Follow up?
Yes. My question includes the part about just the checklist and ensuring that there's a procedure in place that we go in following any type of hurricane to ensure that there is no damage, and if there is, that it is addressed in a timely manner versus waiting for a routine maintenance check.
Now, and I've not been through a hurricane here at the city. I'm going to let you come up, Ms. Sufran. I know you chomping at the bit.
That was Jose.
I've not been through a hurricane here at the city. And throughout the rest of my tenure, I'm not going to go through a hurricane because we're not going to have it. So I'm claiming that we're not going to have one. But in the unfortunate event that we do, there is a very defined process that you go through by doing damage inspections after a storm, where you go out and you document, you look at all of the public facilities. There is a very, very structured process that we document everything, and usually the building inspectors and the code enforcement officers, they are dispatched right after a storm. If the roads are clear, they go out and they start doing that damage assessment. That gets fed into the county system, so that as a whole, FEMA looks at how much damage has occurred, and then they determine whether there's going to be an emergency declaration that will then fund whatever that percentage that they're going to give you. And so as part of that, we have to have records where we have kept up the maintenance of buildings and all of that. So with the new procedures we have in place, we're going to be in good shape to be able to document that we have been maintaining city facilities to put us in the best position of being reimbursed from FEMA. Mr. Front, come right up.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Bridget Souffrant, Chief Financial Officer. We have a before or at the beginning of hurricane season. So right now we actually work with police and fire using their drones to take footage of all of the city facilities. The checklist that Jose Luis referenced was actually part of the problem in years past where we've struggled with some of our reimbursement with FEMA because we didn't have those checklists on the front end. So having those will help us in the future with any funds that we won't need from FEMA, but we are set up, and yes, the drones, then we also do that assessment if we are hit as well.
And not that this is relevant, but I do want the board to know, under my head as Assistant County Administrator for St. Lucie County, I headed up the county's hurricane recovery with FEMA. We got hit with Hurricane Francis and Jean, and then Wilma 11 months later, a total of almost $130 million. And counties and cities have pretty much the same process in place in terms of damage assessment and feeding into the county and all. So with the staff being well experienced here with that process, you know, I'm confident that we will be in good shape in terms of being able to respond if, unfortunately, we were to get hit.
All right, let's make our way back around. President, I'm sorry, Commissioner Sylvester? Yeah, go ahead. You haven't spoken.
Where is it?
It's on.
It's on. It's on. Okay. Still learning. Just a question about the windows. When are they going to be resealed or repaired?
Commissioner, we are currently in the process. We already have the contractor in place. We're putting the final details on the contract and the work order, the scope of work. Our goal, our tentative goal is that by the end of this month, that company will start putting scaffolding up on the building, and you should start seeing the process of the window sealing and the building painting of the building start taking place.
Okay. So obviously you're not going to close in the walls until the windows are resealed, correct?
Correct. We have a couple of areas, and I think you saw one of them when we were in the when you took the tour, where if there is a wall, an outside facing wall that needed to get sheetrock taken down and replaced because it had mold or moisture issues, that has been remediated. But to be on the safe side, we haven't put that wall back. We're waiting for that window to get sealed, and then we're going to put the wall back so that if there's any rain between now and when it gets sealed, if we see that there was something that was missed, we can identify it so it doesn't become a problem.
Just one more. What percentage of the windows were actually leaking and that you found mold? Were there all of them, 50% of the windows?
I would not be able to give you a percentage. I would say just anecdotally, based on the fact that you've got about 80% of that building that is 75 to 80% of that building that's going to need walls torn down and areas remediated. I would say you probably had like maybe a fourth to a half of the windows had some type of moisture intrusion, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a leak. So not every window would be leaking, but you can have a lot of windows that have a little bit of moisture intrusion, and because we're in South Florida, you have a little bit of moisture intrusion, and then you add the heat to it, and it's not a leak, it's not visible. It looks like the window's perfectly fine. So, but yeah.
All right, let me make my way around.
Okay.
Okay. President Peduzzi.
Thank you. This was actually exactly my line of questioning was regarding the windows, because I think the structural integrity, the avoidance of moisture intrusion, that was probably the biggest part of our problem with this building was the moisture intrusion. And it sounds like with regard to the roof, we've got the 10-year warranty. It's probably sealed. As I said, I would have liked to have seen it probably be something more permanent that would have lasted even longer than that, but I understand that we did what was probably economically reasonable at the time. The windows, we're resealing them, I know that when you talk about in my neighborhood, when people have issues with their windows, they usually look at replacing them because the products are so much better now than they were when this building was originally constructed. You can move to storm windows. The windows are better sealing, they're better insulating. Had we looked at not merely sealing the windows, but potentially replacing the windows? And if we have looked at that, why was the decision made to seal them?
We really looked at the ceiling. The windows are in good shape. So given the funding that we have in trying to be judicious on how we spent, the money, we did not approach it from just replacing the windows with, storm impact, windows. So the windows were in good shape, just in terms of the body of the windows, just around them. So we did not consider just window replacements.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Fox.
Thank you so much. I just want to, I guess, go back to all of the numbers because I want to make sure that we're talking apples and apples here, and I don't know that we are. I think when we had this discussion in January, my understanding was that I believe the words like new were used often. So I see now the unforeseen costs that we didn't know about, talking about damaged walls, ceiling tiles, flooring, plumbing. So when I'm looking at the estimates of the work that is still continuing to be done in the remaining 45%, on every floor as needed is not included in that number as needed, ceiling tiles, plumbing, electrical, flooring. Now, also, you say that those were the unforeseen costs from January until now that have led to another 18 million. So I'm trying to understand, is this going to be the final 18 million? Because if all the same things that have caused this to go up to 18 million from January till now, we're putting in the as needed and we're not even including in the budget, to me that could be an additional funding. And in addition, the questions I have about the budgets here, I'm looking at the building costs. In the first category, you talk about 1 year of staff relocations for 175,000. But then in the second two, you talk about 5 years being 11 million. So how does that go from 175 to 11 million? In addition, I'd like to understand how the value of the building was determined. Was the garage included? What was the, zoning that was looked at? Because I have talked to people in the private sector that gave me the number of 75 to 89 million as a value. And that included the whole property. So I'm just curious if your value, I just want to understand if I'm looking at the same numbers, were you looking only at selling just for talking purposes, selling only the building or the entire property? Obviously, it's a whole block. And, the building costs, also, I've talked to people in the private sector that said 35 million to 50 million could get you, something similar. So obviously, there's a lot of variables here, but I guess the first one I want to understand is what you're talking about today with the 18 million, the last that you would anticipate coming to us for remediation? Or should we talk more about the replacing all the ceiling tiles, or replacing the plumbing, replacing the electrical, replacing new flooring, and understand if that is also going to be needed on every floor, what is the final number going to look like? Thanks.
Okay, I hope staff took down the questions. I'm going to try to respond to them off the top of my head, maybe not in the order that they were asked. If we go back to the January presentation, and I didn't load it up, but the board has a copy of it. I clearly indicated at the January meeting that additional funds may be needed. The 13.4 million that the board approved in January was based on what one-time funding we had available at that time. That 13.4 million was the balance of the FY24 one-time funding. So if you reflect back, and Commissioner Fox, I think maybe you and I, had a focused discussion about whether or not additional money was going to be needed, and you indicated it could be 20 million, and you were pretty much spot on, because now we're saying 18 million. So we didn't go into the January 20th, 2026 City Commission meeting indicating that that was all that was going to be needed. We were not even halfway through the building at that point. So it stood to reason that, given that we were going to be testing the rest of the building based on what we had been finding, that we were going to need additional money. The question marks was how much. So in terms of whether or not this 18 million is contemplated to be all that is needed, yes, I can definitively say at this point, it is contemplated to be all that we would need. And I can say that now when I couldn't say it in January, because the 18 million is based on what we project to be done for the remaining 45% of the building, which would complete the project. Now, in terms of the $46 million opinion of value, Mr. Rue can go into the details of that. I did provide the board a copy of the report from JLL. That is only on the building. It does not include the entire property here, because we asked them to give us an opinion of cost on the building. So that's the building only. That may explain the difference between your sources and ours. I've not seen the report based on the information that you're getting, so we're not in a position to compare. But here is what would drive it. If the board made the decision, it's going to be what people are willing to pay. So depending on who bids on it, the appraisal may say, or the opinion of value may say 46 million, or in the case of the numbers that you have, the 80 or 90 million. But if someone is willing to pay us 120 million, then that's what we would get. What were some of the other questions, staff, that you all noted that you can respond to?
A couple of questions. On we noted as needed in the PowerPoint for flooring, roofing, electrical, because we want to make sure that we never misinform the public or the board. And I didn't want to put flooring, electrical, and plumbing for all those areas, because there's very likely areas that don't need new plumbing, don't need new flooring, and we don't want to make sure that we're being forthright in the estimate. But we projected out when we asked for an estimate. When we asked to look at what we were going to need, we projected out that we're going to have the same level of flooring damage, the same level of plumbing damage, the same level of electrical damage in the 45 remaining % of the building that we have identified in the fifth. So it's not that the as neededs are not priced into the 18. It's that we just put as needed because we didn't want to give the impression that every single one of those areas is going to get a new ceiling tiles, new flooring, and new plumbing and new electrical, because they may not. The other question on the 175,000 relocation versus 11 million, there's two factors. Right now, it doesn't cost a lot of money comparatively. It costs money, but it doesn't cost $11 million to relocate the staff temporarily for a couple of months to the photo center or City Hall or the Charlotte complex, because we are doing our best to keep costs down and making do with what we have. So for example, the staff that is using space in City Hall has just been plugged into some empty cubicles that may not be ideal space-wise, but that'll work at least to be able to have a place to sit down and have a desk. The staff that is in the photo center, or the annex as the chief likes to call it, they're working in non-permanent tables like this with dividers. But when you start moving into telling that staff, you're moving now from a 6-month inconvenience where your files and your paperwork and your computers may not be ideal, but I can live with it for 6 months, to 6 years. You now have to start, building permanent cubicle areas. You have to start putting walls where for privacy reason, police department has a lot of different areas, and the chief can speak to, where you have security requirements that you have to be shielded from other staff. You can't have conversations traveling. So now you have to start building out permanent walls that are going to be up there for the next 6 years. And the vast majority of that $11 million is that we've identified preliminarily about 20-something plus thousand square feet of areas that right now, if we had to relocate those special function areas for 5 years, we don't have a city facility space to accommodate them in. So we would have to find some commercial space out there to the tune of 25,000 square feet that we can rent that satisfies all of the security requirements that the police department needs, build that space out, and then lease it or buy, lease it for the next 5 years, or if you have even more money, buy it. So that's the difference of why a 6-year relocation is millions, but a 6-month relocation is only a couple $100,000.
And let me just footnote, because, at a high level, that was articulated or detailed out in the slide that is before the board. But certainly, if the board elects, to build a new building, and we're on this 5-year trajectory of the staff being dispersed, the board has the policy discretion to say, we're going to leave them working in the condition that they're in so that we don't incur any additional expense. Now, that is not something that administration would support, because I think it's an untenable working condition to have, top staff sitting at a table in a chair that is not designed, for long term, side by side, as opposed to being in a private office. But that will be the kind of policy decision that the board would have to make. This is just to give the board the best estimate of what it will cost if you were to move in that direction. And that's why we put estimated, the little approximate symbols in front of it, because all of the numbers will change depending on the timing at which we get the direction and then proceed along that line. Chris, do you want to weigh in on JLL's report?
Yes, Administrator. Chris Rugg, Executive Director of the Community Redevelopment Agency. Commissioner, I just wanted to make sure. So I believe you asked, was the value inclusive of the garage? What zoning was used, and how was the value derived? I believe were the questions. So let me just kind of walk through this briefly. So when we approached JLL, who has done extensive work in this market, and they've done in the background, I'm not going to go through everything, but quite a bit of private sector work to really understand what's happening with the market. And what they performed is essentially an opinion of value, which isn't a formal appraisal. It's their professional opinion based on what they're seeing in the market and their experience and things like that. And so they approached it as any developer would, looking at what a by right development could be on the block where the parking garage and the police station currently are located. And the zoning, which in the report is on page 8, is I believe it's quadrille DB10, and I know that's something, but essentially 10 stories, high density mixed use. But the way that they looked at it a little bit more specifically is, in their opinion, the highest and best use is rental multifamily building. And so that's really what sort of drove it. And they said, okay, well, based on that scenario and what it would cost to build, and then what the market they believe will bear on the rental rate, essentially derived the value of the land, which is what they could pay in order to achieve about a 6% return. And that's what gave you a range of, as Administrator Johnson mentioned, $36 to $45 million for the land. Now, there's a lot of things that go into that. These opinions of values and appraisals have shelf lives. So a lot of it is going to depend on any additional constraints that the board would decide to put on it, timing of the market, as well as what other types of products are coming on, and so on and so forth. So Hope that answers your questions, but I thought it was a pretty thorough analysis that JLL did put together based on a lot of experience that they have done in the city of West Palm Beach.
Follow-up, Commissioner?
No, not on that.
Jose.
Mr. Mayor, just a quick follow-up to Commissioner Ward's question. The sealing of the windows, also 10 years. Yeah.
10-year warranty.
Warranty, yes.
All right, Commissioners, any other questions, comments? Commissioner Fox.
Sorry, I have a different question, but, okay, so the work that has already been done, because I continually see photos and videos of leaking from the roof, leaking in the stairwells. So I'm trying to understand also how are we going about identifying any additional mold that has, or mold that regrows from the fact that there's still moisture coming in, the windows are not sealed, the roof. I mean, it's great that we have a warranty on the roof, but if it leaks and the warranty covers fixing it, but the leak causes more mold, I just want to understand how going forward we're identifying that this work is working.
Chief Tony Araujo, Chief of Police. I've never left the building, Commissioner. I don't know what leaks you're talking about. Nobody shared them with me. I walk the building every day. If you have that, please share it with me, but I have not seen that. I also sit down with the union every 2 weeks. They have not discussed that with me either. So that's news to me.
That's fine, but how about, could we talk also about, let's assume you're right, but how are we identifying whether this work has cured the mold issues in the areas in which we've already finished?
Go ahead, Jose.
I think the way you identify it is by looking at what happens with when there's a rainstorm and seeing if any problems pop up. We had, I believe it was last month, where we had a couple of days where there was very, torrential downpours and rains, and we had no reports of water falling downstairs, causing a waterfall of water downstairs, or the roof leaking, or anything like that. So you don't know what you don't see. But when there's a rainstorm, especially with the building being, half of the building being open up, we go around and we look to see if there's any water coming in from anywhere, to see if we've missed an area that we thought we didn't need remediation, but it does. And we haven't found any, any areas where the roof is leaking, or where there's moisture, water coming in through the windows. But again, the window issue is a separate issue, because the window issue is being fixed as we speak. So yes, theoretically, if it rains tomorrow, you could see water come into a window. But once it's sealed, you shouldn't see that. The roof, I can tell you, it's been sealed. We haven't seen anything. So I'm kind of in the same position as the chief. If there's a specific area that's been brought to your attention that for some reason whoever brought it to your attention decided not to bring it up to the chain of command, the city administrator, the facility supervisor, the risk manager, which is the proper process, please share it with us, because we're definitely interested in making sure that whatever we do in this building is fixed and that we don't miss anything.
And particularly, we got Belfort, we got staff in that building doing work every day, and I just can't imagine that, they are missing leaks from the roof, or water intrusion, and particularly if there are videos. I would think that it would be in the best interest of whomever is capturing it, to present it so that it can be corrected and not sit on it. I mean, we want to do what is best for employees. I mean, the health is paramount. So we're not going to consciously know that the roof is still leaking when we have a 10-year warranty and not address it. So I'm kind of, bewildered that is being reported, and this is not something that we are remotely aware of. And quite frankly, I don't think it's happening.
Commissioner Ward.
Just to go back to the actual question, because I saw it firsthand, you guys have the machines in there, you're testing, you have areas that are blocked off where you can't even go into because there's remediation going on. So in theory, if there was this happening, you actually have things in place, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it was just from my observation walking around the building, that are still testing for potential mold exposure. So I think if there are leaks, we are in the midst of actually being able to detect that in the building right now because of what we have going on in the building right now. Or am I misunderstanding that?
You're 100% right, Commissioner. That wall, a lot of those areas of that building right now are a skeleton where if there's a leak, you see it. You don't need to guess if there's something going on behind a wall. And again, if there's any issues that we have missed that somehow with all these contractors in there and with the building inspections has been missed, we want to know what it is because now's the time, now is the time to address it.
All right, any other questions, comments, commissioners? There is a broader question before us as to the direction you want to head. Staff needs some direction. Do we continue the remediation process or do we stop it and pivot to construction of a new building? If the second option is selected, there's a second decision, which is on the existing site or on the Salvation Army site or another site. But let's deal with the first question. Do we continue remediation process as outlined or do we pivot? Commissioner Ward.
I agree with President Peduzzi. It seems like it's kind of a no-brainer to choose the option that's the more fiscally responsible one and to proceed forward and really lean on the people that we have now overseeing it to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future.
Anybody else want to weigh in? I've got commissioners who say we continue down the remediation path. Any other? I'd like to get at least 3 of you going in that direction.
Mayor.
Commissioner Warren?
Yes, I think the way forward is the current path. I think that that's the most prudent way to address the issue. I think that we've put policies and procedures in place. We have a structured plan, and now it's just up to us to execute that plan appropriately and to restore the facility to what it should be.
All right. Commissioner Sylvester?
I agree. Keep the current plan.
All right. So these 4 of you have said continue down the remediation path. Staff, that's the direction. We'll continue down the path that we're on now with remediation.
Thank you, Commissioners and Mayor. We will look to bring the F resolution on the $18 million at the July 6th meeting. And that way, when we complete the work that is in progress by the end of July, we can keep the project moving and hopefully meet the schedule of getting everyone back into the building by midsummer of 2027. Thank you very much.
And I know you have extended invitations to me and the commissioners to tour. Are those invitations still open?
Absolutely.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you all.
Mayor, can we take a 5-minute break? Let me get ready for the next presentation.
So we'll reconvene
2 minutes.
11:06. I'll give you 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. You're very generous.
Opportunity.
Yes, thank you,
Given the
Mayor.
amount of levity going on at the front of the room, clearly you have taken advantage
My
of it.
CFO just told me she does not want to be in my office. And I can't imagine why.
All right.
Okay, let me regroup after that.
We will reconvene this Mayor Commission Budget Development Work Session and looking at item 3, which is fiscal year 27 general fund expenditure, revenue, millage reduction, discussion, and direction. So,
Yes, Mayor, members of the commission, staff, and members of the public. Again, for the record, Faye Johnson, City Administrator for the City of West Palm Beach. So this last presentation is a high-level review of the additional revenue and expenditures coming into the budget for FY27. So with that, when we look at our FY26 adopted general fund budget, that's the 283.6, and we use 284 million for talking purposes. Again, in terms of the additional revenue that will then shape the FY27 budget, based on the change in the values, I sent out an email to commissioners dated May 29 of this year. So our increase in values year over year was 9.33%. And based on our current millage rate, we're projecting that that will yield an additional $12.8 million in ad valorem property taxes. Moving on to the next category in terms of our intergovernmental revenue projection, that total is 192,000. And if you look underneath that, the utility pilot or payment in lieu of taxes, and this is coming from the utility system, that is an additional 293,000. However, we actually are projecting to lose revenue from the state's half-cent sales tax revenue that we get of 134,000. So balancing out, we have the additional projection of 192,000. Moving right on to charges for service, we have the various categories outlined underneath that, but at the high level, the projected additional revenue is 1.9 million, and the board sees the various line items that make up that additional 1.9 million. Moving on to the next category of other taxes, we're projecting an additional 1.7 million. And that includes an additional 125,000. I was about to say 1.2 million. An additional 125,000 in business tax revenue, and then utility taxes of an additional 1.6 million. In licensees and permit categories, we're projecting to actually lose or collect less revenue. And that category comprises a number of different licensees and permits. We just highlighted one of the big ticket items in there that usually brings in revenue. This is controlled by the state. We're losing 312,000 in revenue. So right now, in terms of the draft FY27 budget, we are anticipating additional revenue, or no, that would bring the budget to 299.9 million, or for talking purposes, a $300 million general fund budget if all of those revenues pan out. Now, we know that under state statute, our revenues and expenditures have to balance. So looking at the draft expenditure side of the ledger, as is typical, the lion's share of the cost increases relate to personnel. At the category level, we're projecting an additional expense of 6.9 million. As we look at the various components of personnel, for police, 5% step pay and the 3% COLA that is dictated by the current CBA, that equates to approximately $915,000. And then if we move on to fire, fire also receives the 5% step pay and a 3% COLA, approximately $839,000 increase. And then when we look at pension, for FOP and fire, an increase of about 4.1 million. That number is higher than it normally would be because we did the multiplier increase for this year as part of the current contract. And you may have heard in the media about the governor signing that special act into law. When we negotiated with police and fire, we strategically agreed to bring that cost into the budget the last year of the contract as opposed to on the front end. So when we look at the other groups of employees in terms of COLAs, that is to be determined, and I'll come back and focus on why we don't have figures projected into the draft budget at this point. Moving on to the next category of material and services, we're projecting an increase of 2.1 million. The lion's share of that is contractual obligations that we have based on the various contracts, and there's a host of different contracts that have escalators in them. Then travel, training, and memberships across the board, 53,000, and then an increase in our electricity bill of 154,000. Moving right along to the internal service charges, and I know we had some discussion about the internal service charges back at the May 4th meeting. We're projecting an increase of about 2.2 million. That is a placeholder right now. We are forecasting about a 10% increase, and it remains to be seen once we finalize the numbers whether or not that number will change. We are hoping that it won't be any higher, but IT is still number crunching. So that is a placeholder at this point. Moving right on to the last category of capital outlay. An increase of 2.9 million. We have under the CBA that obligation that vehicles get replaced when they hit the 8-year, or maybe it's 40,000 miles, and someone can correct me if my memory is wrong on that. But it has a year threshold and a mileage that the vehicle should be replaced. Putting that back into the budget. It was taken out of this year's budget because we could not balance with that. Bringing that back in of 1.4 million. Then with public works vehicles, 500,000, and then road paving of 1 million. So that brings us to a projected or tentative operating expenditure budget of 297.7 million. And just based on the numbers, we know that we would have, at this point, more operating revenue than we have operating expenditures. So if we look at where that leaves us, so right now, in terms of the draft budget, we are projecting an additional revenue increase in the general fund of 16.3 million, additional expenditure increases of 14.1 million, which if you come down to the green line, that gives us 2.2 million of undesignated revenue as we speak. But when you look over on the expenditure column, we have some unfunded expenditures that are going to be determined between now and hopefully the end of July, and certainly by the time that we get to the budget adoption. So a couple of factors that we are planning for a potential increase. On fire side, they have not yet calculated what the cost increase would be of that multiplier. We got the actuary number from police, and that was an additional $1 million, which is built into the 4.1 million. So we're waiting to get the number from fire. So we would have to include that in the budget because we are required under the CBA that is in place. And as the board is aware, we are in negotiations with PMSA and SEIU unions for a new 3-year contract. Their contract expires at the end of this fiscal year. So we are hoping to have their financial proposal sometime soon so that we know what they are requesting, and we can then start negotiating on the numbers. With those two unions, we are behind where we typically are at this point in the year. Typically, by the end of May, the beginning of June, we have the financial proposals, so we're able to then start talking numbers on what the city can afford to put on the table, but we've not yet received that. For context, I indicated what the cost was of the first year of the current contract, and that was a $5.9 million cost. If you just look at that and the amount of revenue that is still up in play, we know that we're not in a position to do that unless it's the pleasure of the board that we start making operational reductions to free up additional money. Also, I highlighted the non-union and the non-management employee COLAs because our practice has been what we give to SEIU and PMSA employees, we also give to employees that fall in that non-union, non-management. So for them, just for reference and context, in FY24, which was the first year of the expiring contract, that cost was $1.4 million. As we move down in the presentation, but in terms of categories of employees, when we have not been in a position to provide COLAs across the board, management employees and elected officials have not received COLAs. So I didn't dial in a number in that we would not be looking at COLAs for most of the folks in the room who fall into management employee category and then elected officials around the table. I do want to footnote, I was told that Mr. Rube has actually planned to pick up the $1 million for road paving. So as the board look at this number, that 2.2 million changes to 3.2 million that we have available for fire, potential fire, additional pension costs to negotiate a new 3-year contract with PMSA, and then if there is money left after that, to then consider COLAs for the rest of the groups. Go right ahead, Bridget.
The roads were taken out of our fiscal year 26 budget, so they are not included in the 2.2. So we're not, it just remains flat, where we still have the $1 million done with CRA contribution. It doesn't change our general fund number.
It doesn't change the 2.2?
It does not.
Okay, I don't want to get down in the weeds, but when we look at, and I may be bottom lining this too quickly, when I look at on the expenditure side, we included the $1 million coming back in, so that increased expenditures.
I am wrong.
Sorry, okay.
I'm wrong. This is vacation brain. This happened while I was out of the office.
I was about to say, I've been up all night for probably 2 weeks working numbers, so.
I apologize.
All right, that means you're going to be up tonight with me working numbers.
Okay.
All right, so with that correction, and thank you for making that correction on the record, the number for the undesignated revenue is the 3.2 million that would cover the other pending expenditure increases. We know that we've had quite a bit of discussion about a potential millage reduction for FY27. So in terms of the scenarios that have been presented to the board, to give you context, we're putting those back before you. Now, just hypothetically, if the board were to move forward with the millage reduction based on the 3.2 million, if you went with a millage reduction of the 0.0505, then that takes $1 million off of the property tax revenue. And that shows you how much in savings based on the different scenarios that our taxpayers would receive. Then that would then give us the 2.2 million that we would have. If the board wanted to do a higher millage reduction, then that puts us in a posture of where we got to then do operational reductions to free up additional money. So right now, if the board wanted to do a millage reduction without having to look at operational reductions, what the budget could sustain would be the lowest millage reduction of that 0.0505. If we go beyond that, we are in a posture of having to do operational reductions because we don't have that level of undesignated revenue. So we then have to go back and look at where in the budget we would make reductions to free up revenue to be able to absorb the level of the millage reduction. And that concludes this presentation, Mayor. I'll turn it back to you and the commissioners for any questions or discussion that you would like to have.
For clarification, you are looking for direction on the question of reducing the millage?
Yes, that is the direction on the millage, so that between now and July, I will have the budget reviews with departments and then start looking at where they need to reset their budgets and what we will be putting on the table in terms of operational reductions.
All right. Thank you for that presentation. Questions, comments? President Peduzzi?
Thank you. I mean, we've been talking about a millage reduction for some time, but in light of this new the new proposals that are going in front of the people for a vote with regard to a property tax reduction, I think we need to also be conservative with what we do here. I would still like to see a millage reduction, but if we could, my preference would be for a millage reduction that will not result in staff cuts, just as you had indicated to us. That I think you said the 0.0505, is that the number?
Yes.
That would probably be my preference because it's taking a middle ground where we are doing a millage reduction, but we're not going to, it's not going to result in significant staff cuts, and it's also conservative enough in light of the proposal on property taxes.
Let me ask a question, Ms. Johnson, because I thought what you were saying is that, yes, we do have that 2.2 million. We also have the unanswered question as to what these union contracts are going to, the PMSA contract is going to cost us. And you use, based upon the first year of the last contract, you put a figure in of 5.9 million. So if that number is remotely similar, that exhausts the 2.2 million. Am I correct?
You're correct, and then we're in operational reductions.
So there's still the risk of operational reductions. We just need to see what that union contract asks for. And if we cut the millage even by the million, that only enhances or exacerbates the problem.
That is correct. But first, unanswered question is going to be what the actuary gives us in terms of the fire, the cost of fires pension multiplier. We probably will get that before we finalize negotiations with PMSA and SEIU, just because of the fact that we are behind schedule where we normally are. And I believe fire is working with their actuary now, so I expect that we're going to get that number any day now.
So there are a couple variables that
Yes.
still have to be factored. Okay. Commissioner Fox?
Thank you, Mayor. That was the question I was going to ask, the same as what you asked. But can you remind us of what the dates you're thinking would be when you would have these answers?
I believe we're going to have the number from fire fairly soon, and maybe Chief Matty can come up if you can kind of give us a timeline on that date. But with PMSA and SEIU, unfortunately, I can't give you a timeline because of the situation that we're in. We're behind where we normally are. We have exerted quite a bit of effort with trying to get their financial proposal, and we have not been successful. So until they give us a financial proposal, I can't give you an estimate of when we will have that done. What we have provided them here in the last session was the budget schedule to try to impress upon them that the board has a schedule that it follows to adopt the budget, which is statutorily required. So we can't just indefinitely go in union negotiations without them giving us a financial proposal. And as soon as we get it, then we can start negotiating numbers. Chief Matty, do you have an idea from fire when we will get the actuary number?
Ms. Johnson, I'm Diana Matty, Fire Chief. I've sent an email to the pension board as well as the local to try to get an update on that. So I should have something, at least a projection by later today when they reach back out.
Very good.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Commissioner Ward?
Well, and thank you for this. I think I want to digest a little bit and probably have a follow-up with you all. I mean, when you talk about just even with the 14.1 expenditure increase, but then when I go to expenditures and calculate it, I just did it a couple times and maybe it's just been sitting here for a while, but that's 13.9, not 14.1. So are these just roundings?
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right. It makes it hard to, to try to digest when it's not exacts so that we can look at it. But here's my frustration, and the frustration I hear from the residents is values keep going up, revenue keeps increasing. We just keep saying, hey, we got to spend more money. And it just seems like it just around and around we go. And while there's some of that extraordinarily validating when it comes to expenses are continuously rising and cost of living is high, but I caution that's what we are faced with when we're going back into the residents is that they're seeing revenue increases, they're seeing prices increase, and yet we can't figure out a way to get our costs under control. And this doesn't help me make that decision because it's just basically saying, hey, these are the costs and this is what it is. And we may be even going over that 2.2 that we have in there and that is what it is. And so I say that not to try to just be, problematic, but just what I'm just noticing just sitting here.
Well, let me just put it into context from my vantage point. Part of this new process, if I go back to the May 4th meeting, we had a detailed discussion with the board on the quality of life operations and the internal governance operation. And we categorized that $58 million by what was completely at the board's discretion to say we don't want to fund. And then we had a second category of yellow that indicated the board had the discretion to reduce it, subject to providing notice to the vendors that we were not going to renew contracts, and then the third category of what couldn't be cut. So as we speak, if we're talking about reducing expenditures, when you look at the lion's share of our budget is employees, that's where we have the discretion. And if the board were to say today, so that when I go and get confronted by my constituents that we're just saying, you know, we got this amount of revenue and we got to spend this money, if the board were to say today, no, we want to not spend 5 million or 10 million, I will, as part of the budget reviews that I have on the calendar, start looking at departments' budget on a department by department basis to identify where those operational reductions are so that we're not spending that level of money. What this tells you is the projected increases that will come into the budget for FY27. So for talking purposes, if the board says, no, we don't want to fund, for example, the $53,000 for travel, training, and memberships, that gives me direction. All of the travel, training, and memberships related to that $53,000, I take it out of the budget. So that frees that up. If the board were to say to me, for the public works vehicles, you know, we don't want to support them purchasing new vehicles. That $500,000 comes out, so it starts freeing up money. That's why we went through the exercise and providing the backup with those quality of life operations, internal governance, and the impact, and gave that information to the board ahead of time so that you could review it and take into consideration where is your comfort level on what we cannot fund or not have. So for example, if you say to me, we want to discontinue providing the event at the Sunset, that's a general fund expense. That money that I have in the budget for that, it comes out. And so you start reducing the budget. You still have as much discretion right now to reshape our budget. I tried to put, this is a new system, tried to put a system in place to give the board an idea of all of the categories, discretionary categories in the general fund that we can look at cutting back.
Thank you for that follow-up. And I appreciate that. I think that, you know, the point is that we're going to be faced with a vote from the public in November, and so having these discussions is important, and I hope people tune in. When you did the audit of our fiscal year 26, you found about 30 million?
25.
25. Okay. So where did you see a lot of that from the audit of areas where I mean, 25 million is quite a significant amount of money. So are we expecting that maybe to happen this next fiscal year?
I agree. And when my chief financial officer gave me that number, which is probably why she made the comment to me just now that she doesn't like being in my office, but that's a whole nother matter. But when she gave me that number, you know, it was sticker shock because in my head, I'm always running numbers, and I was anticipating a much lower amount of unfunded, fund balance, although I don't do the audit as I shouldn't do the audit. But when we look at categories, one of the major categories where we underspent and had money was on vacant positions. And the lion's share of the vacancies were in PD. So for example, if I take the salary savings from the vacant positions from PD and just cut those positions, that's going to free up a whole lot of money, but then it's going to cause some other things. So I don't expect that we will have the same level of salary savings because PD is doing quite a bit of recruitment efforts to fill positions. We will always have some salary savings. Another area where we end up having more money is that when we look at property taxes, we're always going to have some additional revenue from property taxes over what we budget, because statutorily, we have to budget at 95%. When we look at our collection rate on property taxes, it's about 97, maybe trending up to 98. So that delta between the 95% that we budget and the 98% that we collect, we're always going to have that additional revenue. Now, what we do as a matter of practice is we don't take the costs, the salary savings or savings outside of salary. We don't take that and then rebalance the budget for the next year, because every year is different. You know, we may overspend the ensuing year. And then, so if you have cut the budget to that level, now we have a different problem that we have to address. And I don't know if there's some other major areas. You know, I kind of look at it outside of the salary savings, is that when I had Ms. Safran to give me a line item detail of the savings and then a line item detail on the additional revenue, we had a number just maybe across the board where we had incremental savings. You know, so certainly we can do that, let's say for books, where we may have budgeted $100 and the library only spent $80. You know, I can take that 20. So it was, you know, little cuts across the board that then added up. Ms. Safran?
So the two things that I would add to the fiscal year 25 year-end conversation, Ms. Johnson did great in what she's detailed to this point. There was some delay on the expenditure side and capital-related items that are housed within the general fund. So sometimes that's a timing where we're allocating those dollars in this budget year, but they aren't spent until the following year. So there's a timing on the capital. And the other piece is our interest income. So we, as most governments do, we end up being very conservative on what we budget for revenue, because, and interest income is a great example. It fluctuates. We've had a string of good years, but that may change. I feel like every quarter our investment advisors are cautioning us that it's going to change and we're going to, you know, have issues with that. So there's conservative revenue, and then there's also conservative expenditures. We could take a totally different perspective on the vacancy savings and budget a credit, which I understand West Palm has done in the past. That's not best practice. So that's a way to fill a budget gap or appease, you know, certain people throughout that process. It's not best budgeting practices. The other thing that I ask you all to remember as you look at the fiscal year 27 numbers, proposed numbers in front of you, this is flat. This is no new staff. Departments were told they cannot increase their budget other than the contracts that we currently have that are under contract. So if we have a software that has to increase by 2% per the contract, they can increase their budget by that. Everything else, they had to stay within the exact same dollars that they had for fiscal year 26. So talking points to the public, it's people. What people do you want to reduce? And then what subsequent services do you want to reduce? It's hard. These are not easy conversations to have. So as we just added the significant number of staff that we did to public safety in fiscal year 26, now we have to pay for it. We have to pay for it in the increase in retirement and pension costs. We have to pay for it in the annual COLAs that go up each year. $7 million of the 14, you know, is staff. So that's the hard part of where we sit today, that I can cut 50,000 here, 250,000 there, but getting to a $7 million differential, it's not going to happen easily.
Thanks for the feedback.
And I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, commissioners, you still have that information available in your packets, the yellow, the green, and the red. So if you want to go through there and identify those areas that you want to cut, reduce, et cetera, that option is still available to you, which is why we provided it pretty early in the budget discussion, so you would always have it available. So this, what we're coming to you with is not the final say. You guys get the final say. It's your call as to what kind of adjustments, what kind of cuts that you want to make, and the information is at your disposal to do that. Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. So I just want to be clear, because if we think we have 3.2 million is what was undesignated, including the road paving moving to the CRA.
Correct.
So the numbers that are still to come are most likely going to be more than 3.2 million. In other words, we're probably going to have to be looking at cuts of some kind, no matter what. I mean, no matter whether or not we can factor a millage reduction in or not, if we only have 3.2 that we're looking at undesignated and potentially pension costs and the other unions, you're talking about that we anticipate we will not have any undesignated revenue, and we will have to be looking for cuts.
Yes. So here's how I look at it. Fire's number is going to reduce the 3.2 million. And so that will then give us that number that we have money available for the union negotiations. If we are able to negotiate a contract within that number, my recommendation would be that the non-union employees, management employees, forego a COLA so that we don't have to do any operational reductions. Now, that would be a very unpopular recommendation. If it then becomes the pleasure of the board that we want to continue to practice to at least give a COLA to the non-union and the non-management employees, then that's where I would be looking at doing the operational reductions. And this statement is probably an unpopular one as well, but it is my strong belief that management employees, and that includes myself, in tight budgets, we have to sacrifice getting a COLA and make certain that the employees in classifications below us, receive a COLA, just given the level of pay. And I know my directors probably are not going to feel warm and fuzzy toward me for making that statement, but that's how I have proceeded throughout my career. If we go back to when we got into the pinch in FY22, coming off of the economic downturn, that is precisely what I proposed to the board, that management 1 employees up did not get the COLA because money was tight. We had an $11 million general fund gap that we had to close. And the board did not want to see employees laid off. Now, we were in a position in that situation where we were able to eliminate vacant positions and take some other measures to close that $11 million gap. But when we started back giving COLAs, we did not give a COLA to management level 1. And so I include elected officials in that as well, because I know you all as commissioners are always willing to pitch in to help where you can to balance our budget.
Commissioner Warren.
Thank you. Just for clarification, Madam Administrator, the scenarios that you gave us for slide 6, just want to make sure that I understand completely what this is saying. So based on this scenario and looking at the largest amount that is highlighted for a millage reduction, that scenario leads us to a $12.5 million deficit, correct?
Yeah, that just wipes out what we were bringing in additional tax revenue.
Okay.
Bottom line.
Okay, and according to that same scenario, in looking at the $450 savings for the highest value of property, and that would be that at the range of $750,000. So that $450 is what they would save annually. That's the total amount. So that would be $37.50 per month if we looked at that on a monthly savings, correct? So and that's the highest amount of savings according to this scenario would be $37.50 per month, but the deficit that would be created would exceed $12 million. I want to make sure that I'm clear that that's what this document
That is correct.
saying.
Yes.
That's it.
Any other questions, comments?
Mayor, if I could, just to put it into context, on the commission's calendar, this meeting was intended to be the tentative discussion about the millage reduction, so that the commissioners, after seeing the numbers and all, would then have time between now and when we come back for the July work session to have formulated precisely where the commission is as a body on a millage reduction, so that you have the background information, you now have the numbers in terms of the projected additional revenue coming into the general fund, you have millage scenarios, and hopefully that puts you in a position where when we come back to the July work session, you would have formulated your position on what level of a millage reduction, and then where in the organization you would support the operational reductions.
All right, so what direction are you looking for from us today?
I am not really looking for direction today, Mayor. So again, tentatively, I guess the board, if you're in a position to say, we definitely still want to look at a millage reduction, and we're somewhere between 0.05 and 0.23. We can start tentatively planning on how we would reshape the budget. But if the board is not in that position, then I'll look at the July work session, where the board will come in with a definitive position at that time.
Okay. Commissioner Warren?
I just want to say that I am very proud to have voted for millage reductions for the entire time that I've been on this commission. I think that that's something that I think all of us are happy to have contributed to. But and at the same time, I am interested in doing everything that we can to ensure that we do not have loss of staff or anything that will impact the way that we provide services to the community. I think that that's extremely important that we consider those things as we consider the scenario that has been placed before us.
You anticipate, Ms. Johnson, having the missing numbers well in advance of July and to be distributed, so we could see how much of a gap we have even before a millage reduction?
I anticipate having fires.
Right.
Again, unfortunately, union negotiations are not going nearly like they have gone in the past, so I'm not optimistic that come July I will have a number unless something changes dramatically on the union side.
Well, I mean, it causes me some pause because I don't know how we can start making specific recommendations when that variable is out there. I mean, at what point will we have the specific data necessary how are we even going to balance the budget, putting aside a millage reduction? How do we balance the budget when that information, are we going to have that information? When are we going to have that information? The deadline for this body to adopt a balanced budget is when? September?
Yes, you're statutorily required to adopt the budget.
All right, so are we going to have that information prior to September?
Mayor, I don't know. I don't know.
There are options if we don't have it prior to September.
I know, and I don't like having to tell the board that I don't know, but I'm not going to give you a false date.
Worst case
here.
scenario, what are
Worst
our
case
options?
scenario, our option would be, as we have had to do in the past, if we end up in an impasse situation, that's where we are. And the board still has to meet its statutory requirements of adopting the budget. And what that does is that we then pick up negotiations after the budget is adopted in October, and whatever number is negotiated, then we have to look at how do we then, at probably mid-year, make the adjustments to fund the contract. I mean, it's a precarious position to be in, but we have asked and we have asked and we have asked.
Do we put a placeholder in the budget
The placeholder would be,
contract?
no, the placeholder would be if there is any revenue that is undesignated when you adopt the budget. So we probably would put that in contingency as a placeholder, and then go to negotiate, pick up negotiations.
All right, so commissioners, I think the takeaway here is look at the data we have available. We'll see what FAR comes in with. We probably won't have the union number yet. So the decision for you to make and come back with in July is, A, do you want a millage reduction? B, how much of a millage reduction? And then C, how do you anticipate paying for the millage reduction? And hopefully you have all the data you need to make that decision. So when you come into the meeting in July, you are prepared. Whatever information you think you're missing, please reach out to Ms. Johnson so she could get it to you. But I guess that is the direction in which we're headed by July. Do we have a date for that meeting?
We do. The calendar's on my desk. I mean, at my table, not my desk.
Your new desk.
So by July
It's July 27th.
27th.
So we have quite a bit of time,
We need
hopefully.
to make a hard and fast decision on millage reduction and the budget.
Yeah, and at that meeting, we would have received the final
Oh,
values
far by
from,
that time, yeah.
yeah, from the property
About the
appraiser.
union. I understand. All right, any questions, Commissioner Fox?
Thank you. I think this is what I asked you before, but I just want to understand. So if we have 3.2 right now undesignated, we don't know what's going to happen with the unions and waiting for a pension, but you said maybe let's assume that that's a wash with 3.2, but then we still have the question about the non-union, non-management COLAs. So I want to clarify that we're still looking at that as a number that would exceed the undesignated revenue, that we have to consider how we might find that putting the millage reduction aside, if we wanted to ensure that all of our employees could have COLAs, we need to find that money somewhere.
If the number from fire and then the union contracts exceed the 3.2 million, and we want to give COLAs to the remainder of the employees, then yes, we have to find that money in the budget. We're going to have to reduce something to free that money up. Okay. Yes.
Is this something that you will give us a recommendation of where you think that could come from, or is that something we should plan to come to the July 27th meeting with ideas for?
The lateral.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I don't have anything on the mayor's matters. Commissioner President Anderson, you may have some business you want to discuss.
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
You don't need me here for that, right?
No,
Okay, so I got
you can stay if you want.
another thing.
Thank you. So, as everyone knows, as commissioners, we've received a collective letter from our commission aides asking for us to review their titles and pay grades, among other things. After consultation with the city attorney, it was determined that the discussion would likely have to take place at a publicly noticed meeting because determination of grades and reclassification is something that usually comes before us approximately twice a year. There was a mid-year review that we already did, and then there'll be, before the end of the fiscal year, there'll be another potential reclassification agenda item that comes to us on the consent agenda. So it is my understanding that city administration and HR will not be involved in this process, that we will be discussing this as a body in the sunshine. As such, if there's no objection, I will ask city administration to allow us time at the end of an upcoming mayor commission work session, likely the July 27th work session, that we would have an opportunity to discuss possible reclassification of pay grades and titles. So I don't know if you want to discuss that in general here about having that meeting at the end of a work session where we discuss whether we want to move forward with talking about reclassification of titles or grades. So what's the pleasure of the body?
If I could, Mr. President, we also have a July 13th work session. So, the board has those 2 dates as options here, that July 27th meeting. It's going to be a pretty packed agenda, and if you want to make certain you all have adequate time, for discussion and deliberation, I would suggest you think about the July 13th work session date.
Okay, I'm just looking at the calendar to see. So we could do it at either one of those work sessions. Is it something we want to do? Is it something we want to discuss together? I would suggest that we probably should. Commissioner Fox?
Thank you. I just want to understand, I think maybe our city attorney can help us, but if we, let's say, decided to reclassify our aides, that is something we have to vote on. I know that we have voted it for other departments, usually on the consent agenda. But once we move past that, discussions about whether or not we wanted to give them a raise or whatever it's going to be, is that something we can just discuss internally without having a meeting once we decide they will be reclassified, or do all of these things need to be in the sunshine?
They're two separate, well,
I guess I'm just trying to
there's
understand.
not really, the raises come with the budget adoption, with the cost of living raises that are or are not provided based on your budget. The reclassification is separate and apart from a raise. It may or may not result in a raise with a reclassification. So I think it depends. But if it's a discussion about a reclassification, because you vote on that as a body, it's something you would have to have in the sunshine. Yes. And your raise, for that matter, too, is in the sunshine because it's part of your budget. But it's that budget. It's not a raise separate and apart from the cost of living adjustments in the budget.
Right. It is my understanding that we wouldn't necessarily have to have something in the sunshine as long as the increase in pay came within that range of the pay grade. As long as they're within that pay grade range, obviously, we've got to have the money to do it, and it's got to be in the budget. But that wouldn't have to be in sunshine.
What's not in this? I think I lost the...
Deciding where in that pay range an employee should be.
Well, yes, because that's part of what's on the reclassification ordinance. The reclassification resolution has your pay grade, your title, the range. It's all in that document.
Right.
So yes, that would be discussed.
Discussing the
sunshine.
range, yes, would have to be in sunshine, but determining where they would fall within that range subsequently to our vote on changing the grade, if we voted that wouldn't have to be. We wouldn't have to debate, well, should we give this person $3 more or give this person what? That doesn't have to be, as long as we establish
there
a
is
pay.
no more. I mean, a reclassification, and maybe, I don't know if HR can describe it better, but a reclassification provides a range with it, and the dollar figure that person is making is either within or inside that range or not.
Commissioner
I
Ward.
can say it a different way.
Yes.
So
please.
there's a range, and with every different type of employee, we are saying that yes, we want to if we would want to change what they're designated as, and it would change potentially the range in which they are paid in, we would do that in a meeting. But the actual dollar amount that each of them are making, so 50,000, 70,000, whatever, that does not have to be discussed in public at the meeting. Just the fact that
Oh,
we
you
are
mean what
bumping
their
them.
amount that
Right.
they
Right.
earn?
The
You don't have to
specific
talk
amount.
about that in your public meeting, but what they earn is what they earn.
Right, as long as it's within the range, that's for the department to determine where they fall within that range.
Yeah, if I could, let me chime in. So hypothetically, the commissioners, you all have this discussion, and we determine that they are going to be put in a different classification. That classification will come within a range. So that new classification will then dictate where they land on the pay scale. So for talking purposes, if their pay currently falls within that new classification, there is no pay increase. But let's say hypothetically, if their pay falls below that classification, then it would follow the normal procedure where they have to then be brought up to the minimum of that pay classification. So I agree, you don't have to get into, well, we want this person to have $3. Here is where I think, and you correct me, Ms. Rothenberg, where it then would require a public discussion. If after you make the decision about the pay, the new classification, and then you want them to have pay above what that new classification will put them, then I think that has to be a public discussion. But long as you're following standard procedure, I don't think you have to then publicly discuss $2, $3, because it's going to just follow the procedure.
Thank you, and that's where I was getting at, that as long as they are being paid within that pay grade, we're good.
Right. It's if you want to do something
I don't
above
think-
and beyond.
Yeah, I don't think we
then-
were talking about doing anything above and beyond. We're going to set whatever, pay grade we think is appropriate if we decide to change it. I mean, it could very well be we have a discussion and we decide that they're right where they need to be. I don't know until we discuss that in public, but that's why I think we need to have this discussion as to do we think a change is warranted or reclassification is warranted, and then looking at the options that we have, where do we think the change should take place, if at all, and then we put them in those. And I've looked at the different options, and it looks like no matter almost where we put them, they're still going to be their pay is still going to be within that grade because they're at the upper level where they are now. But that can be determined afterward, I would think. But is there a consensus that we put this on an upcoming commission work session agenda? Commissioner Ward.
Yes, but also I just want to ask a question. We've had a couple of resolutions where people have changed classifications. Was HR, not involved in that when you all did that internally? Because I just feel like it's a little bit weird to me that HR wouldn't be involved with us in helping to determine this.
HR is always involved from every other aspect. HR and finance review the documents every time.
So why would we be an exception to that and siloed in that regard?
That's a mayoral question.
Yeah. Well, darn.
Okay. Yeah, it's just my understanding that administration and HR have made a determination that they will not be involved in this process. I'm not sure, when or why that decision was made, but that decision, my understanding, has been made. And so that we're to proceed the way we are proceeding with this, having a public discussion about it. And unfortunately, we won't have the benefit of an analysis about their position and whether they are correctly categorized and pay grade and all that, which is what I think that if we had HR involved in it, then maybe we would have had the benefit of some of that information. But I think we can move forward doing it this way, as long as there's a consensus to put this on a work session agenda. I'm not sure that yet that I'm going to be here for the July 13th work session because I'm assisting with my kids' summer camp. July 27th, I believe I'll be here. That's the only reason I said that. I don't know that it needs to be more than a 30-minute discussion. Commissioner Warren?
So how does every other department make this determination?
So there's a process, generally twice a year, the mid-year review, where there's direction given from city administration on, you have to find money within your budget to propose or reduce positions, depending on the climate financially that we're in at that point in time. The documents are submitted after they're given the deadline. HR reviews the documents, and I'm going to let Renee speak to their analysis from the HR perspective, and then financially we review that what the departments have proposed is accurate, because sometimes they don't understand how all of that works into the budget. And then we're also tracking them. If they're saying we're going to cut $10,000 from this budgetary line item to compensate for this increase or change in job class, we track that so that we keep them honest when the budget time comes, that you said you were going to cut here, you need to cut here. So that's the financial side. Renee?
Renee Govig, Chief HR Officer. The typical I can describe, but this is a little bit out of the ordinary because it is the commissioner. And that would be a mayor's decision, how that goes forward. What we would typically do is we would get a request from the department. Can you take a look at this position? It seems like it's morphed into something else over time. The market has changed. It should maybe be in a different pay grade. We take all of that into consideration, and Sylvia is a compensation expert, if you don't know that, from known all over the state. And she will look at other municipalities. She will look at other public sector, nonprofit type of organizations. We'll look at the job description, see if the tasks match up, and see if that classification is correct. And then separate from that, but related, is it in the right pay range? Sometimes the job hasn't changed, but because of market conditions, it's now worth more. It's now more difficult to fill. So we would change the pay range. To President Peduzzi's point, when you change those ranges, doesn't necessarily mean that there's a change in pay. Based on range A, and they get bumped up to range C, there's overlap. So if they're already high in range A and they get bumped up to range C and they're above the minimum, there's no pay implication whatsoever.
Thank you for that. Unfortunately, as it stands right now, HR is not been authorized to get involved with this with us. Now, if you collectively as a body want to inquire, because I think it would make sense to have HR involved, because then we'd have data that would help us make our decision. But as of right now, this is the way we're proceeding. We're going to, if you all concur, we will have a meeting where we discuss it in public. Maybe by that time something will change, but if not, we will proceed with discussing it ourselves, and we'll try to make a decision with what we know, as long as there's no objection to that, Commissioner Warren.
I just find it interesting because we have HR experts. We have people that this is what they do all day, every day, and they're responsible for ensuring that the categories are correct, that the pay is correct, and we're not including them in this process. That just seems like a odd approach to addressing this and coming up with a meaningful solution that doesn't put us back here in 2 years.
Well, we would like to include them.
That's where we are now. Commissioner Fox?
Well, not that we're not including them. I would like them to be included if that was an option. I mean, I think that would make sense. They were the ones that helped us in the hiring process and told us what category they should be in initially. So I'm not sure how we decided initially they were in those categories rather than another category, but those are all things I would certainly like to understand better, and having HR professionals involved would be helpful in the process. But I am on board with having a workshop if needed, July 13th to move forward. And, hopefully maybe something will change in the interim.
And if I remember correctly, HR was intimately involved in the whole process, in the hiring process, and I believe Jose Luis Rodriguez was the HR director at the time, and he was, very helpful. And because we're literally operating in an area that none of us are experts in, to my knowledge, and so it certainly helped with the classification, because we didn't come up with those classifications. I think that we were given guidance as to where they would be, and everything from pay to job grade classification to titles to everything, and helping with the interview process. But that's not where we are today. Commissioner Warren?
And when we went from the staffing metric that we had before to the one that we have presently, there was a classification change at that time, correct? And we looked at what the positions would transition into, and took into account some of our changing needs, and that we wanted to do things that included more technical savvy. We wanted them to be able to do newsletters and to do different things, and so all of that was factored in. And so I think that HR's perspective during that time was very important, and I think that it still is. And I'm going to leave it there, because I'm sure that my colleagues have something to say. But I think that it is a great conversation, but that we need to think about where it was, where it is, and what we, I guess, then project it to be, so that it's not something that continues to come up as an issue. What do we believe that the positions are? What are they? And is there a transition that we anticipate that could also warrant a change in how we're looking at the salaries?
And you are correct that it was when we went from 2 commission aides to 5 commission aides that HR became involved and helped us with reclassification, and I assume it was subsequently voted by us on that. If we are where we are, if it is the administration's decision that HR won't be involved in this process, the only other option we would have, we don't want to do it ourselves, would be to hire an outside HR consultant to do it for us. But I'm not even sure how logistically we would go about doing that, whether we can even make such a request. How would we budget it? I don't know how we would proceed on that. Maybe the city attorney could fill us in as to if the commission itself wanted to hire a consultant to fulfill a specific role, can we do that, and how would we go about doing it?
It kind of overlaps with other questions when you're asking. These are HR is a city function here for the city. And to hire a consultant to do something outside of what our folks already do just seems like anyway, I would rather look at it than shoot from the hip. I would certainly at a minimum say that you would, to hire anybody, you would have to have funding for that, and it would also have to be the procurement code and other requirements of our code in order to do any kind of hiring. But I don't want to give legal advice from the hip here. It looks like you are looking at a later July meeting, and I certainly can get more information to you on that question.
Thank you. And excuse me, Madam City Attorney, I think you've highlighted the quandary that we are in, that that would be the ordinary process, I would think, but we don't have direction over staff. We don't determine how city departments are utilized. And I could understand why it's an issue that why the executive department wouldn't necessarily want to be involved in that. I understand that, but then we're left with how do we handle this?
It's not really a want to or not want to, but all of the staff within the city, every one of the department staff is supervised and directed by the mayor. It's by charter, and that's how it is. And it based on priority and what other things that various departments have on their plate and what needs to be done and what the impact on other departments is. And that's an executive function to decide if it is or is, if the assignment is or isn't appropriate based on the workload of the department that you're looking at. And if that's the call that's been made, that's outside of what I decide. It's what the mayor decides as the executive.
And I would agree with you. That's certainly within his prerogative to say that this is not something that he feels is a priority use of his department's time, and that's completely within his prerogative. And I understand that. I just think that it creates a little bit of a quandary for us as to how we move forward, making sure that we're doing things properly and making sure that we're utilizing, the citizens' funds that we're entrusted, and not that it necessarily means anything we're doing here is going to result in additional salary, or because of the fact that as I said before, some of those salary ranges multiple of them, our staff already falls within the range, which means there wouldn't necessarily be a bump in salary, but we just want to make sure we're doing this correctly. And unfortunately, at this point, unless it's reconsidered, we're on our own, which I think we can move forward. And we'd need to do that, though, at a publicly, noticed hearing, just like we're doing right now. Commissioner Warren.
Last question. Who determines the audit team salary and the range that the auditors fall within?
I'm trying to remember the charter as I sit here, whether or not it talks about salary, but ultimately the commission decides.
So the commissioners determined what
I'm
the
not su-
auditor's
well,
salary range.
The commission approves the budgets. The mayor approves the salaries of the employees. The auditor, under the charter, is called out separately, and I'm trying to remember as I sit here without looking at the charter whether or not it talks about the auditor's salary or just the fact that that position is established. I know that the city administrator's salary is called out specifically within the charter, but I'd have to look at the charter because I don't remember if it says that the commission sets the internal auditor's salary or if it's a function of the executive as it is in any other position. I just as I sit here don't have that to memory.
And I asked that question because the auditor is the only one that actually reports to the commission.
Right. And they absolutely does by charter, but the charter may or may not spell out who sets the auditor's salary. Probably initial salary, I would think that the commission would have had to done on hiring of the internal auditor, but I'm not certain. I'll have to look at the history of that.
I'm just unsure as to why this would be different. If the auditor reports to the commission.
Well, because there is no charter provision that provides that the aides are subject only to commission. They're a regular city employee like all other employees. They're not. It's not the same as the internal auditor.
That's my point.
Sorry.
That's my point.
Commissioner Sylvester.
Right, that makes sense. I just don't know if we should go forward so we can recruit HR to help us, whether it's outsourced or it's our own HR department. I would hate to get all the way to the end and realize we did something wrong.
We are left in a position that at this point, and I'm not saying that necessarily that the administration is doing something that's incorrect. It is within the mayor's prerogative to determine how the HR department spends its time, and the determination has at least been made at this point that they are not going to be involved in that process, which I think leaves us the only option of having that public work session, or if HR continues to not want to be involved, which is within their prerogative, that we go about trying to figure out how to hire an independent HR to help us with our decision making, to do an analysis, to look at the data from other cities, to determine whether they are properly categorized and that whether their salaries are commensurate with the level of work that they're doing and with the surrounding community and what other commission aides are doing. We just aren't professionals in that area to know that. And that's why, I would love for HR to be involved, but as I said, if the decision is going to be that they're not going to be involved, then I think we need to still move forward and try to consider it either on our own or if we can within the confines of what we're allowed to do as a body in potentially hiring an outside entity. And the city attorney had said, well, you have an HR department within the city.
Yeah,
And I
it's
know
really-
that, but we can't use it.
But it's really just, it's different, it's a legal question that's running in my mind, and I'll flesh it out for you.
Okay. Commissioner Ward.
I want to keep belaboring this. Let's get it on the agenda for the next work session for us to discuss. We're going to be doing a disservice to them to try to delay it, provide more money to someone else to determine. It's unfortunate that we can't use the people that are within this building that work with us, but that's a decision that we don't have any control over. I think we all agree on that. The message has been relayed to everybody in this room, and hopefully anybody who's listening, that it's a little bit silly, but it is what it is. We need to continue forward. Hopefully we won't be shooting at the hip when we meet in July. Hopefully we'll have some, we can look and pull other directives, and whatever we decide as a body, I just hope that after the fact, we aren't then, discredited by saying, well, this isn't what HR or finance would approve, because we didn't have access to that. So let's just move forward.
I agree that that's where we are right now, and we should probably move forward with it and not delay it. So as I said, I may not be here for the July 13th work session. I will be here for the July 27th work session. It doesn't rely on me being here, but
We should wait for you. You're the president of the commission. We should wait for you, and it is what it is. It'll be a long meeting like today, but you should be part of the meeting as well.
okay, even if that's the consensus, then I would request that city administration put it on the July 27th. And, I'm hoping that it doesn't need to be more than a 30-minute discussion at the end, but it just needs to be still within the publicly, scheduled meeting so that we comply with sunshine.
We will schedule it on that agenda.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And if there's nothing else, then we will adjourn this meeting of the City Commission work session
Thank you.
at 12:24 p.m.